Day, Wednesday, May 11th, in Pinellas County. And with that, I'd like to call this meeting to order. And we will have the invocation and the pledge, and I am given the privilege today to do the pledge and the invocation. So if you would stand at this time and bow your heads. Leo Tolstoy once said that there is no greatness where there is no simplicity, goodness, and truth. And I believe what that means is, as elected officials or those who work with us, that we should all do the very best we can for the citizens that we represent. I'd like to pray for our staff, who without our staff, we would not be the great elected officials that we are, because they believe in our journey and the issues that we are here and the problems that we are asked to solve each day. I'd like to pray for our president, all of our state, county, and local leaders in the hopes that we all make good decisions for our citizens. We also take this moment to pray for our police and our sheriff, our servicemen, our firemen, and all of the individuals that come within the boundaries that we represent, especially our citizens. I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. At this time, we'll go around the room and introduce ourselves. Commissioner Mertz.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Commissioner Cliff Mers from City of Safety Harbor, representing the cities of Oldsmar, Tarpon Springs, and Safety Harbor.
Good afternoon, Brandy Gabbard, City Council Member for the City of St. Petersburg.
Bonnie Noble, Council Member for Kenna City, representing the inland communities.
Julie Ward-Bajalski, Mayor of the great city of Dunedin.
Michael Smith, Vice Mayor, City of Largo.
Dave Eggers, Pinellas County Commission.
Dave Albritton, City of Clearwater, Council Member.
Janet Long, Pinellas County Commissioner at Large.
Whit Blanton, Executive Director.
Cookie Kennedy, the mayor of Indian Rocks Beach. And I'm going to ask Nusheen to come up to the podium for just a second. So I asked Nusheen to come up here because she did a milestone. She got her master's degree in geography at USF. Very nice. So I think that is something to be proud of. And so here's a little something from Boyd Pinellas for you. And if you want to say anything, you can.
I was up here not too long ago for another milestone, so I'd say it's been a pretty fortunate time in my life, and I just want to say thank you for all your support. Thank you.
I love our staff. We have such a great staff. We are really grateful. So let's start with citizens to be heard. Tina, are there any citizens wishing to be heard on any issue item not already on the agenda for action by the board today?
Yes, Madam Chair, we have Mr. Todd Pressman wishing to address the board.
Mr. Pressman, if you'd like to come forward.
And Mr. Pressman, you'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair and board members. My name is Todd Pressman, 200 2nd Avenue South, number 451 in St. Petersburg. I'm here today on behalf of the US 19 Main Street Task Force. We were here about a year and a half, 2 years ago. It was in the middle of the pandemic and was all by Zoom, so this is a pleasure to be in front of you all today. We had saw at that time the elimination of a pedestrian crossing point, of which the board denied. Since that time, we've looked very closely at the road segment and the area that we're located in. And we'd like to bring forward a much different proposal, which would not be the elimination of the pedestrian crossing, but an adjustment or movement of that crossing point pretty close to where it was planned by FDOT. But we did that by the priority direction of what your staff had at the time, the priority being where's the residential, where does residential access? So we look very closely at those access points, and we do have a plan of that adjustment on this unique segment that we believe even better addresses the residential access points that would use the pedestrian access and tunnel. So there would be no change in the height of the tunnel, the width of the tunnel, or area that would be in, it would just, or it would be a movement and suggest a movement. So what I'd like to ask with respect, Madam Chair and Mr. Blanton, board members, is to allow this request to come back next month where we can present it to you, ask for discussion as an action item for review and consideration to move forward. Thank you. Be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Pressman. We will discuss this under our director's reports because I think Whit Blanton would also like to make some comments at that time.
I understand. I will say that I have a meeting with Commissioner Justice and some department members at 2:30 in Safety Harbor, so I do have to go to that meeting.
Are there any questions anybody has now?
Do any of the board members have any questions at this time for Mr. Pressman? Mayor Julie?
My question's for Whit.
Okay.
Have you seen this alternative? I have. Okay.
Whit, you need to turn on your mic, please.
I have not. My only comment would be that if there's a substantial change in
Yeah, it's gonna
the
hold up the
location
whole
or
project.
design, I'd want to make sure that the Florida Department of Transportation thinks it's feasible, and then we would probably need to run it through our committees,
Yeah.
our Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee, our Citizens Committee, our Technical Committee, and the PSTA Track Committee, the Transit Riders Advisory Committee, all of which weighed in on this back in September or August of 2020.
Where are they with the design at this point?
That's a question for FDOT. The design is complete. The bids are being let this spring, is what I was led to believe. Jensen, am I generally right?
I see people shaking their head, yes. Okay.
Justin? Yeah, okay, so the design's 100% complete and bids will be let sometime in the next month or two.
So I
Madam Chair, if I may respond to that with some information. We did recently
Yes.
meet with Secretary Gwynn at his offices, and his direction to us was to come back to the Ford Pinellas board and see if there was room for discussion or consideration for this adjustment. So that's why we are here. So he's aware of our activity. We've been having a lot of communication with FDOT.
Okay. Mr. Eggers?
Yeah, I don't have any problem hearing it again. I mean, I don't want to, by doing that, give undue expectations. I mean, we have looked at this before, but when it comes to the business community at this time, especially what they've been through the last couple of years, I'd prefer to err on the side of listening to a business community and just hear what it is. I mean, at the end of the day, all we can say is what we said a couple of years ago, prior to this last 2 years of effect on our businesses. So I have no problem bringing it back to hear it, but just my thoughts.
Commissioner Gabbard?
Oh, go ahead.
So I guess I have a couple of questions. So whenever we voted on this in September of 2020,
That's right.
Yes.
was there consideration on the right-of-way? Was there any right-of-way takings based upon what we actually decided?
No, there's no right-of-way impacts.
No.
Are there right-of-way impacts on what you're proposing?
No, it would be a tremendously different proposal. We would still include the same pedestrian crossing where before we sought to eliminate it. It would just be moved or adjusted a little bit to the north. That's all.
Okay, and it went through all of our committees and everything, just like you were mentioning, it would have to go back through again. It went through all of those, and was it, I mean, what was kind of, I know what our outcome was, but I can't recall, was there any, I guess, kind of wavering support from any of our committees or anything, or?
I don't believe so. I'd have to go back and look at the notes to see what
Yeah.
the votes were, but I think they were also unanimous.
Okay. And is it, I mean, it's not common for us to go back and revisit this late on something that's this far ahead. Is that common for us to do?
Once a design is complete, that's unusual, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's never happened.
Okay.
I'm
I'm just trying to think of a time since I've been sitting here for
Sure.
now going on 5 years. I can't remember us ever doing that.
Well, this is the first I'm hearing that there's an adjustment that's being recommended. So, I'm a little heartened to hear that, the underpass would still continue. And, when we adopted the policy, the board did not dictate that it be in a certain location. The board said there should be a spacing policy and let the Department of Transportation use engineering analysis and judgment to determine where the best location was. And I do remember having a conversation in Senator Hooper's office when you or the property owners asked if it could be moved to the south, and FDOT said it could not. So I don't remember if we had a discussion about moving it to the north. So I'm open if that, still accomplishes all the goals and has less of an impact, but I want to make sure we're going through the process right. And I have not heard from the department, so I think they would need to evaluate this.
And FDOT chose the location.
They did.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Albritton?
Yeah, and I remember having some pushback from the business community there, and my concern was, well, it's not the same as a height as a regular vehicle overpass. It's a smaller, but I did think that it really needed to be, we needed to have the pedestrian crossings because it's very dangerous. But I'm willing to listen to, what plan it is and consider it. So I'm open for listening again.
Commissioner Long?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess my initial thoughts when I first heard about this were, where are we with the design and all of that? And I had, if I knew back then, I have forgotten about all the other ancillary parties that came into the decision-making. I always worry about the actions we take and what kind of precedent it sets going forward. And I'm curious about, given how far down the pike we are with this, what is the financial impact to the project, given that we would have to go back and do all of this again, correct?
Well, I think if there was agreement that a readjustment in that underpass would happen, the department would have to reopen the design and finish the design. I don't know what expense or time that would take. I think everybody's been anxious for this project to get started, and it's finally here in this fiscal year. So the department would have to see what's being proposed and how big of a deal that would be, and I don't think we can answer that right now.
I mean, does anybody else worry about the precedent that this sets in terms of how hard we work to get projects going and get them from the design phase to actually doing something? And you could take almost any project that we've worked on. I'm thinking in particular of the roundabout up in Palm Harbor and how difficult that was to get that from point A to point B, because everybody had an idea about how they wanted to change it. And so I don't know. I mean, part of me wants to say, okay, well, there's no harm in taking a look at it. The other part of me says, well, if we start doing that on every project that we start going down, are we going to find ourselves doing it over and over and over again, further delaying progress in our entire county? Those are my thoughts.
Whit, if we did look at this, what is the time frame as far as putting us back, would you say? Is it 1 month? Is it 2 months? Is it 6 months?
Well, we would have to align with our committee schedule, and so we would have to see the proposal, have DOT tell us that it's feasible, and then, because I wouldn't want to take it to the committees if it's not feasible and the department doesn't support it. And the committees take a break. I'm not sure which meetings we're skipping, but we might be missing the July meetings this year. I don't know if Chelsea's online and can tell me, or Tina, if you know, or Maria.
I just confirmed with Maria that the committee meetings will be canceled in July along with the board meeting. The soonest the CAC could hear it would be August.
Okay. So we would be looking at bringing it back to the board in September at the earliest, and that would be something the department would have to address in terms of, could they still let the bid and still get a contractor and then have that resolved as part of the mobilization? Justin, is that something you can answer for us?
The letting's planned in June, so anything that we did after that point would be a SA, a construction modification. So it would be subject to whatever the contractor chose to charge for that additional change.
Okay, so there would be a construction modification and a charge that would occur potentially, depending on that. So it's not cost-free, is what I'm hearing.
Commissioner Gabbard?
So I agree with Commissioner Long, and that's why I asked the question, is this something that we normally do? Because I can't remember a time that we've really done this in the time I've been sitting here. So for me, process is incredibly important, and continuing forward momentum versus continuing to go back and relook at projects that have already been decided. So that would be my concern. And then I guess I'm still a little confused. So you mentioned when I asked my first round of questions that FDOT chose the location. So if this is a change in location, why is that coming back to us? Why would FDOT not just be the one that the group would work with to make sure that it matched? I don't understand.
That's actually a very good question. What I had understood Mr. Pressman had an issue with was the underpass at all. And our policy was to direct the department to do that spacing if they possibly could every quarter mile, but if not, every half mile would be acceptable because those are considered, rule of thumb, good walking distances for people. And beyond that, people aren't going to walk too much. So it was a broad policy direction. When the board voted to not only reaffirm that policy going forward, but to support this underpass at this location.
Okay.
So I think with the department, when they met with Secretary Gwynn and others, they said, we're not intending to change it or eliminate it, but if you got Ford Pinellas to tell us to do that, then we would
Got
consider
it.
that. But, you know, I think that's a really good question for the department. If it is a technical adjustment and all things are still being accomplished in terms of that east-west connectivity that's so important in the US 19 corridor, then I don't know that staff has a real strong particular opinion here or that it's an issue for the board as long as it's being carried out. But again, I haven't seen the plan and I would have to make a professional judgment of how significant of a change that is.
Yeah, I have concern about reopening our process, going through all of that, the delay that may happen to have to go through our committee process again, when to me, it sounds like there could be a resolution between FDOT and the citizen organization. I just.
Well,
Mr.
again,
Pressman, have you
Ma'am?
reached out and showed the plan to FDOT?
Oh, specifically, we met, I met and others, we met with Assistant Secretary Gwynn about 2 weeks ago, showing specifically what we wanted to do. His direction was completely to come back to Fort Pinellas and have them look at it. So I couldn't agree with you more,
Right.
Councilwoman. We're kind of getting a little bit caught between two.
We're saying go back to
organizations.
FDOT, they're saying come back to
So,
us, so.
I think one thing I can do is I can send the plan over to Mr. Blanton. It's very simple, straightforward, and he may consider it not to be a major adjustment. I don't think he will. I certainly will send it to him today or first thing in the morning. That may make him feel fine on what we're doing, because it's really not much of an adjustment. So that's item number one. Item number two is, again, to reaffirm to you that we're here because Secretary Gwynn sent me here specifically. So he went to, and we did discuss delays or costs. We didn't want to cause any delays or any cost. We made that very clear to him. We don't want to be holding this project up. Everybody wants to move forward. Again, Mr. Gwynn gave us the green light to go ahead. So,
Justin, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I think just to clarify, so Justin Hall, District 7, I was in that meeting. To clarify, when we had the meeting, it was about getting rid of the underpass. And our opinion was that we were told by this board, it was clearly communicated to us that we needed to have pedestrian access, cross access every quarter mile if possible, and at maximum half a mile. And so this crossing meets that threshold. And so what we said was if there was gonna be any conversation about modifying that, you know, whether it be get rid of it, move it, change it, because we're already pretty close to that half mile increment. So, you know, any move to the north, we'd have to see if we still meet that half mile increment. That was the guidance, was that they had to come back to you because that was a requirement or a request that this board had been made. So in the meeting we had, we have not seen the proposal. All we had in that meeting was that it was to get rid of the underpass or to modify the underpass, but we haven't seen any kind of proposal to the contrary. So, I mean, we'll definitely look at anything anyone brings to us, but we haven't seen anything.
Mayor Brzezowski?
I'm just going to say that if the design is complete and they're going out to bid in weeks, I don't think we should touch it with a 10-foot pole. I really don't. And it's a no offense to the people that have the concerns, but we've already addressed the issue. And so to address it again is like undoing the vote we already took. And so I just think we've done this. and they've designed it. And to try to even throw a new redesign in there is, A, it's not prudent for our tax dollars, to our residents. And let's face it, US 19 has been a 50-year freaking project. I don't want to see it delayed anymore at all.
Okay, well, let's do this. Let's do a show of hands shall we look at this project again? If you want to look at it, let's raise your hand, and we'll just go from there.
Mayor Kennedy,
Yes?
if you could
want
entertain a motion and
you
a
want a
second.
motion?
A motion, a second, and
Okay.
a formal vote, and I can do it by roll call if you want.
That would be fine. Okay, I need a motion to look over the project on US 19.
I would like to make a motion to take a look at the project, and I had one more comment. Thank you.
Okay. And there's a second. Commissioner Edgars?
Thank you. And I agree with everything people are saying here. First of all, I'm a process geek myself, so I think it's important. But nothing about the last 2 years has been normal, okay? So businesses have suffered dramatically. So taking a precedent to do something of substance rather than of process, I think at least is okay to take a look at. I'm not interested in delaying the project. I'm not interested in additional costs. I'm not interested in, taking our committees through the next 6 months and throwing us out of whack. We can know all of that at the next meeting, what that estimated issues or estimated things will be. Can the project move forward without this piece being solved at this point? Again, I think there's just more questions than answers that we can probably get in 30 days. And if it looks like it's too tall of a mountain to climb, then we say, we looked at it and we move on. But I think sometimes we have to look at what the issue is. And I remember the discussion was always about getting rid of it versus having it. That seemed to be the primary focus. And that's not the issue today. So moving it forward, moving it north a little bit, maybe it's a big deal. Maybe it's not. And so I just thought it wouldn't hurt anything to take a peek. But that's my closing comment. Thank you.
Whit, would you like to?
Yeah, I think those are good points, Commissioner, and I have a couple of thoughts on that. How about if we did this, regardless of how this vote turns out? If Mr. Pressman can send me what his proposal is, and I can get with FDOT staff, and we can just have a conversation at a staff level, and then come back to you at your June meeting and let you know what we think.
Okay.
That seems to be procedurally fine. It shouldn't hold up the letting of the bid. And then we can make a determination if it's significant enough for us to go through the committee process. And if Mr. Pressman wants to, we'll have to make it an agenda item in June, so if he wants to be here for that conversation in June, I think that's what you were asking anyway.
Yeah, I think that's very common, and I think that would meet the concerns that I'm hearing in the room.
Yeah,
Thank you.
but one outcome could be that the department and I say this is a significant change, and it is going to,
Throw it off.
throw it all off. Then we're back to the committees, and we're back to a September, October timeframe.
Councilmember Gabbard?
So the motion, what is different, I'm sorry. So what is different between what you are proposing regardless of the vote and what his motion is?
Well, I think the motion is for the board to take it
To
up.
open it
and
back
put
up.
Yep.
Yeah.
And have that on the agenda.
Your suggestion is to review it along with
I
FDOT
just
and then
haven't-
bring back a report.
Yeah, I just haven't seen anything.
Would you
so-
amend your motion to just?
And I'm fine with that. And if we have a place on the agenda to have the discussion, and you come back with that update, and it's just, here's the deal, you all. We're going to have a 6-month delay for process that you're talking about, and it's probably going to be significant dollars involved. We don't know exactly what it is, but some redesign costs. And there may be some unique aspects of where they're moving it to that's more costly. If you come back with that, the conversation would be pretty short. I don't think any of us want to delay the project, and any of us want to add cost to the project.
Commissioner Edgars, why don't you amend your motion and just say that we will come back, we'll evaluate with Secretary Gwen and the FDOT, and then we will have a meeting, and we will have this on the agenda for June. Can you amend?
That's fine,
Is
that's
that-
fine. That was really kind of my intent, was to
Okay.
just have a placeholder in June that we've had the conversation. That's all.
Is that, thank you, okay.
Mayor
And-
Kennedy, can I finish since I
Yes,
still
yes,
had?
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. Can we ask as part of that report, because I'm hearing like there's concern about some sort of financial impact or something to business? I'd like to hear that information as part of the report, if Mr. Pressman, can provide that, because I guess for me, I'm kind of lost on what the impact to a business would be to move something so minimal. So if that is a piece of our concern, then I would like to hear that information.
I think that's a great question.
I think I would also be interested to know if we move it north, are there other businesses that might object
Right,
to how we
right.
move it?
Yeah, so.
Okay.
I'd also like
Very
that
good.
any of the new
Oh.
members who are here
Ears
today.
burning?
Yeah, I see. Any of the new members who have not voted on this in the past or may not know all of the information, Whit, could you make sure that they are brought up to date on this item? Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Mayor Bujalski, would you like to?
I do.
Okay.
Thank you. I just filled them in that they were talking about the underpass.
Okay.
Well, so a couple of things. I guess maybe it's more of a comment than a question, but I'm concerned that the issue of the pedestrian crossing in whatever form it is got brought here to the political body when the FDOT was met with 2 weeks ago, and they could have easily sat down with WIT and had a strategy coming together here to save time, and that didn't occur. That's bothersome for me. I'm just letting you know, that's how I feel about it. Secondly, and I don't remember, I'm sure it's in the minutes somewhere, Whit and Tina, we had the discussion about economic impact when we voted the last time. I don't want to rehash this, and I'm suggesting that we don't, because we had those conversations. And to come in at the last minute when the design is done, I think I think that simple thing, if somebody had come to you a few weeks ago and you were buying into it, that'd be different. But that's not what's happening here. And I just think that process is,
I think the reason that's not happening is because we were told that this was to eliminate the underpass. So I'm hearing for the first time today, it's not eliminating
but
it, it's moving
again,
it.
they could have called you after they met with FDOT 2 weeks ago.
Right.
They could have discussed it with you. They still could have come here, but that didn't happen. They came to a political body, and to me, that's purposeful.
Let's just take 1 minute, for 1 minute, okay? Let's just take 1 minute, okay?
We do have Secretary David Gwynn in the audience who's joined us today. A little bit of introduction.
I didn't want to throw a grenade at Secretary Quinn, but he's more than happy to speak on this item. This is the head of FDOT, the assistant for District 7.
Correct. Right, so I apologize for being late, but I think I know the topic. And and I had talked to Whit about this before, and we did get visited by folks that wanted to, at first, I guess, eliminate the crossing there. We explained to them the process it had gone through and that we supported having a crossing there to make sure you didn't have that long distance you'd have to go between crossing locations. I think the concern was still the visibility of the properties on the outside of the right-of-way. We had shown them a number of drawings and even do some visualizations to show that, it's not like an overpass for a road. It's not quite as high. And, but they also said, well, maybe it could go to a different place. I think their concern is that at the location it was, that they didn't see a big demand there. And I know that was discussed earlier too, about you look at current demand, you look at future demand, look at transit, things like that. There was not a specific location proposed to us to change. There was discussion about maybe it could be somewhere else. Could it be somewhere else? I guess it could, but then you aren't really getting the distance separation that you were looking for, I think was a half mile. I don't know, it'd probably be one would be less than a half mile, one I guess would be more than a half mile roughly, depending on where you put it. We're letting the project, in other words, we're awarding the contract to a bidder next month. So any change we would make would have to be a change order worked out with the contractor. We would have to more or less negotiate and redesign the plans to make any of those changes. So, you know, we would still let the project as it is, but is it possible to make the change? It's always possible. I don't know what it will cost us, but it's always possible.
Okay, anyone have any questions?
Yeah.
Commissioner Edgar?
Secretary, thank you for giving us your perspective. So do you feel pretty strongly that this not only delays the project in total, number one, and two, does it increase costs? Neither of which the board seems to have an appetite for. So in other words, is there enough project to move forward, even though this little piece might be delayed and moved? And secondly, do you anticipate, well, you don't even know what the
Well,
place
not knowing
is,
where
but-
it's going to be. If it's too close to the overpass, I don't know you're going to go up and down. You might just have to go straight across because you may not have enough length to go down and come back up. Then you probably end up with more earthwork and things like that. So it's hard to say if the cost would be more. If you eliminated the crossing altogether, that was a discussion they had, then you would probably save a little money, but you lose the crossing. If you move it around to another place, it could be a similar cost. It wouldn't go down any, I don't imagine, but it could potentially go up, but I don't know without looking at the specific location. As far as the time, this is a design bid build project, so it's not like they're waiting on the design after they get the contract and not knowing what the contractor's, prosecution of the work would be, depending on, what he's going to stage first and all that. It's hard to say whether it would hold them up or not. We would have to design it. We'd have to then sit down with the contractor and negotiate a supplemental. Don't know if it'll be higher or lower. I doubt it would be lower because once you already awarded a contract, your negotiation powers are not quite as strong.
Gotcha.
But
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Secretary Gwen.
all right.
And I guess with that, we have a motion. Tina, would you like to call the roll?
Mayor Bujalski,
Nay.
Councilmember Driscoll,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Smith,
No.
Commissioner Eggers,
Aye, yes.
Councilmember Albritton. Commissioner Long. Councilmember Floyd,
No.
Commissioner Mers,
No.
Councilmember Gabbard,
Yes.
Councilmember Noble,
No.
and Mayor Kennedy.
No.
The motion fails.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the time.
Tina, at this time, is there anyone else in the audience who'd like to speak today?
No, Madam Chair, there is not.
And with that, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Yes, sir.
Not on the last subject. But I did want to acknowledge that we have the Pasco MPO Executive Director here, Carl Mikiska. Carl, if you could stand and be recognized. Carl previously was the Executive Director of the MPO Advisory Council. So he went from a statewide perspective to our neighbor to the north, and we really like working with Carl. So thanks for coming. He's taking all your good ideas and bringing them north. No, I'm kidding.
Move approval of the consent.
To any board members, I don't know, are there any board members who want to take anything off the agenda? Obviously, I guess we're past that. Okay. And we'll take a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, we'll move on to public hearings, and this is the Metropolitan Planning Organization, and this will be the adoption of the FY 23-24 Unified Planning Work Program by Chelsea. And we entertain any questions for the board members as needed. And will, Tina, are there any members of the public who would wish to speak on this item?
Chelsea's going to be joining us via Zoom for the presentation,
Okay,
and then we can entertain any questions after that, if that's
Okay.
okay with you.
yes, that's fine.
All right, good afternoon, board members. Tina, can you confirm that my presentation is up?
It is not, Chelsea.
Oh, it is now. It just popped up, I believe. All right. Well, thank you for having me here today. I apologize I could not be there with you in person, but I'm here to talk about the Unified Planning Work Program, or
Dan,
what
are
we
you
call
able to pull the presentation up in the boardroom?
There we go.
We're all set, Chelsea, thanks.
Okay, thanks. Or the UPWP. So we actually brought this to you in draft form back in March of, March of this year. The UPWP, this is a schedule. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I apologize. The UPWP is a federal and a state requirement, and it documents our transportation planning funding. It's really that accountability measure that documents to the state and feds how we're spending the transportation dollars that they're giving to us. We have to update this document every 2 years. And so the last UPWP was adopted back in 2020, and it covers until June 30th of this year. So it is time for us to once again develop our next 2-year UPWP to align with the budget cycle. This is generally the schedule that we utilize. So right now we're looking at adoption by the board today. The federal review agencies will take a final look next month, and then on July 1st, it will become the official planning document for Pinellas. So this right here is a breakdown of our funding resources. We get planning funding from Federal Highway. We get funding from the Federal Transit Administration. We get funding from the Surface Transportation Program. And the UPWP is structured in a way that is broken into individual tasks. And I'm going to walk through each one of those tasks. So these are the 9 tasks that we have in the Unified Planning Work Program. And this right here really just shows overall how much funding is available to Ford Pinellas for planning activities over the course of 2 years. You'll see there's about $2.7 million for personnel, about $4.4 million for consultant services, about just under $20,000 for travel. And then you're going to see a section there for other, that other is actually covered under Task 1. Task 1 is our program administration. This includes direct expenses like rent, insurance. We did include some budget for bicycle and pedestrian counters. We already have active counters along the Pinellas Trail, but with new segments of trail opening, we're looking to really expand our count program. So we've included money in this budget to be able to purchase additional counters. And then also included in this is board and administrative support and other procurement activities. Our second task is public participation. This covers all of our outreach activities, all of the work that Amy's been doing on our website and the maintenance of our social media, and also an update to our public participation plan. Our third task is systems monitoring, and this is the funding that goes towards monitoring all of the crash data, maintaining our count program, and also looking at some performance metrics along the transportation system. Our fourth task is by far the largest. It's systems planning. It's a very general category, but this is the task from which we fund our Complete Streets program. We're proposing to do a mobility audit program. That'll be another grant program that we're currently working on putting together for our local government partners. This also covers waterborne transportation planning activities and support to our local partners. The Transportation Improvement Program, this is a pretty small piece of our budget, but it is a substantial amount of work that we do. And you'll see that we don't have any consultant expenses in this. This is 100% of staff time that we put into developing the TIP, updating the TIP, your annual adoption of the priorities, and also processing any amendments that comes out of this task. Our long-range transportation plan is something that we have to update every 5 years. And there is quite a bit of money in here for consultant services because it is such a large effort to undertake. And so we definitely need to draw on some consultant support to be able to complete the work that internal staff doesn't have the capacity to undertake. This includes development of population and employment projections, projections of financial resources, and then balancing it all together to get a final long-range plan. Our seventh task is regional activities, and this covers the MPOAC support that WIT provides, and also a lot of our coordination activities throughout the region through the Suncoast Transportation Planning Alliance and some regional model and data sharing as well. Our special projects is our eighth task, and some of the things we plan to do with that in the next 2 years is the implementation or continued implementation of the Gateway Master Plan. We're going to continue to work on Safe Streets Pinellas. We're going to be implementing our equity assessment that you all received a presentation on just a month or two ago, and also implementation of the downtown St. Petersburg mobility study. And our ninth and final task, this is a task that we share with the other MPOs in the region. Each of the MPOs has committed to giving $5,000 annually towards consultant support for some regional activities. The regional activity that we've chosen to pursue as together is the needs assessment. We're going to be looking at equity, crash, equity, safety, mobility, and resilience needs for the entire Tampa Bay region. And Ford Pinellas, we're actually the recipient of those funds, and we're going to be leading that effort on behalf of the region. So the draft that was included in your packet includes comments from state and federal review agencies. We've been working a very iterative process to get this final draft ready for your review. And today we're seeking board approval of the final UPWP so that it can go into effect on July 1st. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Does anyone have any questions for Chelsea at this time?
I would just like to acknowledge the work that Chelsea and Rebecca Stisley of our staff did. This was a new format, and there was a lot of additional work that had to go into it, a lot of new guidance from the feds and from the department. And I'm really pleased with the work they did. And they've responded to comments that the federal government and the state provided. So I think they did a really good job overall.
Question real quick.
Sure.
Yes.
Under the planning section, there's listed the waterborne transportation. What do you envision in the next year with that effort?
A good question. I think first is to oversee the phased implementation plan that this board adopted a couple of months ago. And that entails working with PSTA, working with our local government partners to secure funding for waterborne transportation services, because that's ultimately where it comes down to implementation, and also to potentially seek grants that might be made available at the federal government level. So those are staff activities that we would perform.
And obviously, we had a pretty robust conversation yesterday about the St. Petersburg to Hillsborough connection, and some discussion about how that fits into our overall waterborne transportation system. And we kind of took a back seat a little bit this past year to that effort on some capital, recommendations or support. Mm-hmm. And so I just want to make sure that we're at the ready for what our thoughts are as
Absolutely,
far as
absolutely. You know, I think the issue is, it really comes down to operating funding, both for the Cross Bay Ferry and for the Clearwater Ferry. And this agency doesn't really manage operating funds, but it is, part of showing that there's a system plan, showing that there's analysis being done about where dock locations could be, span of service, and then most importantly is working in partnership with PSTA so that whatever Pinellas County service does end up happening kind of fits within that realm of what public transportation needs to be, which is frequent, reliable, on time, scheduled, things like that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Long?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair.
Can you turn your mic on, please, Commissioner?
Sorry, I thought I hit it. What I would be very interested in whether or not your staff is aware or has done any research on the type of, I don't know if you call them engines or generators or whatever, because I've been very focused, as most people know, on the electrification of these kind of things as it relates to our public transportation options. And we keep being told by HMS that there is no such thing for vessels of this size. Meanwhile, it has been shared with me that there are several European countries who absolutely are focused on this type of technology for their ferries, and most countries around the world that have water around them have utilized public transportation in their ferry boats. Mm-hmm. And so it just really rings my bell when I hear them constantly make reference to the fact there is no such thing, the technology isn't there. But even if it's not electrical, there is a new technology that combines hydrogen and water, I think it is, to produce electricity for jets. And so I think we're being almost irresponsible if we don't move in that direction and really push the envelope. Why on earth would we continue using antiquated technology to move forward what could potentially be another tool in our toolbox for public transportation option to get people back and forth to work? Why wouldn't we put that on the table?
I think that's a good question. In fact, I was at the St. Pete Chamber Transportation Committee meeting yesterday, where there was a person participating in the meeting who is involved in hybrid electric diesel technology. And she was adamant that that technology is available, but admitted that that technology could probably not be deployed by October. So I think the question would be, how do you phase it in? And is there a path for phasing it in? And that's something I think that all the parties are interested in seeing how that could happen. So it's a matter of timing. I know there are some
Well, yeah.
technological challenges, but there is also, it comes down to how the service is operated. And I'd have to see, what those other technologies are, but that's something we can certainly look at the Waterborne Committee level.
Well, I would like to have us have a conversation about that at the Waterborne Committee level, because clearly, people that have worked with me for a long, long time, I'm not rigid. I just want to know that there's a desire and a plan to move forward, to take advantage of it when it does. If ever there was a time to move on it, it's now, especially there's a whole segment of the new infrastructure package that deals with waterborne ferries. So.
Yeah, I think what we would have to consider is what are the cost implications of doing that? And is that financially feasible and when? But that's certainly something, we do have a committee scheduled for July. So we could at least start having that conversation at the Waterborne Committee in July and maybe look into some best practices that are
Thank you.
around the globe.
Thank you very much, and I'll send you what I have.
That'd be great.
Anyone else that would like to speak? Tina, is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak on the Unified Planning Work Program?
No, Madam Chair, there is not.
And with that, we're going to need a motion?
We'll need a motion, and then I believe it's a roll call vote. No, it's not a roll call.
No roll call.
Move approval.
I forget.
Did you get that?
Who was the
Mayor
first? Thank you.
Bajowski and Commissioner Long. Any comments from either of you? You're all set? Okay, with that, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, motion carries. Okay, we're going to move into the Planning Council hearings, which will be conducted as follows. Forward Pinellas staff will present the item. The applicant, local government are available for questions as needed. And our new graduate, Nusheen, is going to do this presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Nosheen Rahman, planner with Ford Pinellas and new graduate. Today, this first case is from the city of Largo and a CW 2209. And am I missing the clicker? Oh, it's on the ground. All right. My apologies. So the city in this case is seeking to amend a property from retail and services to public, semi-public, and the purpose of this amendment is to allow the expansion of an existing religious institution. This parcel is located at 1199 East Bay Drive and is approximately 8.36 acres in size. As mentioned, it is currently used as a religious institution, specifically Grace Family Church, and surrounding uses include commercial retail, recreation open space, and single-family residential uses. Now, moving forward with these land use case presentations, you'll be seeing a little bit of a different view of the aerial images. Normally, I go out to the sites and I take pictures, but we want to try something different where we kind of give you a more holistic view of the surrounding area. So in this case, this aerial map with the red pin drop shows the existing church, which is Grace Family Church, with some of that surrounding area. So showing you the recreation open space uses to the west, as well as residential uses to the north, and even further beyond that, institutional uses such as Largo City Hall. Now, this map in front of you shows the current countywide plan map category of retail and services with the development standards for this category in front of you as well. Now, currently, this site is designated as retail and services and formerly consisted of a major grocery retailer, specifically Winn-Dixie, but that's since closed, and then the Grace Family Church was built upon it, but with a conditional use on the property. So this essentially limited the square footage of the property under this designation. But it is the intent of the applicant to expand this religious institution, and in order to do that, they would need to amend this property to public semi-public, which would no longer have that square footage limit on it, and public semi-public is typically more suited for religious institutional uses. So this map in front of you shows that proposed category along with the development standards for this category as well. Now, as you're aware, one of the countywide considerations we take into account is whether the amendment area is located in the coastal high hazard area, and just less than an acre of this amendment area is located in that, but the proposed amendment will actually result in a decrease in maximum allowable residential density from 24 units per acre to 12.5 units per acre because it is going to the public, semi-public category. And even beyond that, this amendment area does have access to an existing evacuation route, which is East Bay Drive, and it utilizes existing building and infrastructure and disturbed area. So to conclude, this proposed amendment is appropriate for the intended purpose and is consistent with the locational characteristics for the public, semi-public category. And on balance, it can be concluded that the proposed amendment is consistent with the relevant countywide considerations contained in section 6531 of the countywide rules. Here are those considerations in front of you. And lastly, there were no public comments received for this case, concluding this presentation.
Thank you, Nusheen. Is just a note that Diane and Taylor are here from the city of Largo in case there are any questions. And at this time, I'd like to ask Tina, are there any proponents?
Madam Chair, we do not have anybody who has asked specifically to address the board, no proponents or opponents, but we do have folks here representing the church and other entities if there are questions only.
Okay. Does the board have any questions at this time?
Just in this day and age where churches are having a hard time surviving, and a lot of churches are, and it's good to hear that one might be actually growing and needing more space. And so, anyway, just a side comment.
That was nice.
Motion to approve.
Did you get, the motion was made by, are you Vice Mayor now? Yes, Vice Mayor Michael Smith from Largo. And then the second was from Commissioner Dave Edgars. Okay. Do either of you have any comments, Michael, on this at all from Largo? You're, okay, good. Is this a roll call? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And Nusheen, don't go anywhere. You're here with us.
Yes, this next case is also submitted by the City of Largo and is CW 22-10. And in this case, the city is seeking to amend properties from the residential medium, retail and services, and activity center categories, all to the recreation open space category, while maintaining the portion of the amendment area that is activity center at the same designation. And the purpose of this amendment is to allow for the expansion of the existing Bay Head Park. The park is located generally at 350 Seminole Boulevard and is approximately 7.07 acres in size, though I should clarify the amendment area is approximately 7.07 acres in size. As I mentioned, currently Bayhead Park exists in the amendment area, and surrounding uses include retail, institutional, and single-family residential uses. So similarly, here's a more detailed aerial view of the amendment area with Bayhead Park shown primarily to the west, where you see those retention ponds, and you can see mainly the residential uses surrounding the area, as well as institutional uses to the east. Now, as mentioned, there are a number of parcels involved in this category and multiple parcels involved in this amendment with multiple categories, and the next few slides will just be going through those categories and their development standards. So here we have the residential low-medium category, next the residential medium category, and then the retail and services category, and lastly, the activity center category. Now, the reason that these parcels, though they are part of Bayhead Park, are designated as various categories, simply the categories do not reflect the existing use as recreation open space. But now that the city is expanding this park, the recreation open space category is a better reflection of the existing use as the park. So the city is amending all of these parcels that are not activity center to the recreation open space category. And then the 2 parcels that are designated activity center will be remaining the same, but their underlying uses are still recreation open space uses. So you can see that in front of you in this map with the proposed countywide plan map category, as well as the development standards for the recreation open space category. So to conclude, the proposed amendment is appropriate for the intended purpose and is consistent with the locational characteristics for the recreation, open space, and activity center categories. And on balance, it can be concluded that this amendment is consistent with the relevant countywide considerations in section 6531 of the countywide rules. As usual, here are those relevant considerations in front of you. And similarly, there were no public comments for this case. That should say CW 22-10, but there were no public comments for this case either, concluding this presentation.
Thank you. Tina, is there any proponents that would wishing to be heard?
No, Madam Chair, there are no proponents, opponents, or other citizens wishing to be heard on this item.
I'll close the public hearing. Is there anyone on the board who'd like to make a comment at this time?
I just want to say that we kind of pushed this park a little bit. You know, we're still wanting to do this, but it's kind of, we pushed it down a little bit because of cost. So it's still going through the process, but I just want to make it clear that the city is still wanting to do this, but we just pushed it off a little, looking at the cost and everything, so.
Okay. Anyone else at this time?
Second.
Councilmember Albritton first, and Vice Mayor Mike Smith seconded. All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. With that, we'll move on to 5B3, case CW 2211, and Nushin will, another for the City of Largo.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So again, this is submitted by the City of Largo, and in this case, the city is seeking to amend within an existing activity center, specifically the Largo Mall Activity Center. So in this case, we won't be seeing any change in designation, but just a change to the parcel in question. And the purpose of this amendment is to address an existing non-conforming property, which is used as a restaurant. The restaurant is located at 10050 Ulmerton Road. It used to be a Golden Corral, though I'm sure a lot of you are aware that with the onslaught of the pandemic, a lot of Golden Corrals and buffets in general have been suffering. So this Golden Corral is now closed, and the size of the property is approximately 3.24 acres. And surrounding uses include commercial retail and single-family residential uses. So the red pin on the map shows where the Golden Corral property is, with a lot of the residential uses kind of concentrated directly to the east, and the commercial retail uses concentrated along the corridor of Ulmerton Road. Now, as mentioned, we are not actually seeing a change in the countywide plan map category designation, so what you see on this map here will remain unchanged from that. But the reason that we're seeing this here today as a public hearing is because the underlying local categories which the City of Largo has designated are seeing an increase in density, and when we see that in an established activity center, we're required to hear this as a public hearing and have this in front of the board today. So as a little bit of a deviation from the usual presentations, I'll show you some of the underlying local categories involved. So in front of you, we have the current local category of residential office general, and under this category, the restaurant was designated as a sit-down use, which is non-conforming to this current category. Hence, the proposed amendment to the residential office retail category, which would allow the continued use of the property as a restaurant use, which is the intended continued use. But as mentioned, this would just result in an increase in allowable density, so we have to hear this as a public hearing. On top of that, the amendment area is also located almost entirely within the coastal high hazard area, and this proposed change, however, will result in a decrease in permissible floor area ratio from 0.5 to 0.4 at the underlying local future land use level. And even more, the city of Largo limits residential density to 7.5 units per acre in their local special flood hazard area, regardless of the land use designation. So even though by right, the change in local underlying land use category allows an increase in density, this is protected because of their special flood hazard area. Furthermore, the subject property does have access to a designated evacuation route by way of Ulmerton Road, and it is on a site of existing infrastructure, limiting that impact to the coastal high hazard area. So to conclude, the proposed amendment is appropriate for the intended purpose and is consistent with the locational characteristics for the activity center category. And on balance, it can be concluded that this amendment is consistent with the relevant countywide considerations contained in section 6531 of the countywide rules. In front of you are those considerations. And lastly, there were no public comments for this case as well.
Thank you. Tina, are there any proponents at this time to speak on this agenda item?
No, Madam Chair, but we do have the representatives here if there are any questions.
Thank you. Is there anyone on the board who'd like to speak on this agenda item? Michael, do you want to say anything, since it's your town?
We have no problem with this. Actually, I think this would be a good fit right there, since Golden Corral's already there and needs to be replaced. So I have no problem.
Good.
So motion to approve.
Did you get those? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. With that, we're going to go to presentations, and we'll start with PSTA. Councilmember Driscoll, do you have a report for us?
I do. Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. The PSTA Board last met on April 27th, 2022. Among the topics discussed, a big one was transportation disadvantage eligibility income increase. This is great news for many of our riders who are struggling right now. The board offers, well, PSTA offers the transportation disadvantage program for lower income riders where they can buy a monthly pass for $11. The program clients are required to submit eligibility documentation annually to certify for the program. Currently, the program has a defined income requirement of 150% of the federal poverty level and below. But of course, with changing factors such as job changes resulting in changing travel patterns due to the pandemic and other reasons, and then of course, increasing wages to entice workers is moving people to different areas for work as opposed to perhaps closer to where they live. So what PSTA has done and what the board voted to do was to recommend increasing transportation disadvantage eligibility from 150% of the federal poverty level to 200%. This will help cover more people who are in need of some assistance with their bus passes, and it also helps to cover a gap that's been created now by the minimum wage increases and also the general wage increases that are coming with new job opportunities. So we were thrilled to move that along and help get that access to more people. AVA, our autonomous vehicle advantage, is now running in Dunedin and receiving rave reviews. There was a block party event recently, and many of the folks from Tarpon Springs came out to test Ava, and so perhaps she will go there next. We shall see. The spring break service promotion was extremely successful with over 31,000 riders taking the opportunity for the free service from downtown Clearwater to the beach. This is only 1,000 riders shy of the promotional ridership that we did in 2019. So getting really close to being back at those levels, which is extremely exciting for that sense of normal. So those are the highlights from PSTA's most recent board meeting. The next one will be held on May 25th, 2022 at 9 a.m. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for Councilmember Driscoll? Okay, we'll move on to T. Barta. Commissioner Long? Okay.
Commissioner Long, can you put your mic on, please?
I do not have a report from T. Barta. The meeting for this Friday has been canceled for lack of a quorum again. And that's about it.
I will just add that tomorrow we have a meeting at 2 o'clock. It's an executive team meeting to look at some alternatives for the Regional Rapid Transit Project that would connect Pasco from State Road 52 to the Gateway area here in Pinellas County. So we're looking forward to seeing what they're developing. They started out with a ridiculous number of stations, and they're now trying to get that down to about 15 to 20 stations for that long of a length, and that'll probably get further winnowed down because it's not going to be very rapid if we have too many stations. So we're looking forward to that. It looks like Countryside Mall, somewhere around the Largo Gateway area would certainly be a station, and then we'll see what other stations we might have in Pinellas County. So that'll be tomorrow. That is, T-BARTA is leading that. It's the executive team meeting, so I think it involves Carl and his team from the Pasco MPO, our staff, PSTA is probably involved, Pasco County Transit. So it would be at the executive level of those agencies.
Any questions? Okay, we'll move on to the Sun Runner Rising Development Study, which will be presented by Jared and Eric. You'd like to come forward?
Good afternoon. I'm Eric Bosman with Kimley Horn, the project manager for the Sunrunner Rising Development Study. I do want to acknowledge that Cassandra Borchers, PSTA's Chief Development Officer, is here today, but I'm also happily going to steal some of her speaking points. So as many of you are aware, as we've appeared before this board before, the Sunrunner Rising Development Study is funded by the Federal Transit Administration through a grant provided to PSTA. And this project has been a partnership between PSTA, Forward Pinellas, the City of St. Petersburg, and the City of South Pasadena. What we're asking for today is for you to consider accepting the study so that it can become a policy document of Forward Pinellas, and staff can continue to move forward with its implementation into your countywide policies and regulations. Also, as we've mentioned before, this is not a transit study, rather it is a development study that looks at the potential for new development in and around the station areas based on this significant investment that is being made in public transportation throughout the Central Avenue corridor. As most of you are aware, the Sunrunner will start later this year and will be running from downtown St. Pete, out First Avenue North towards Pasadena Avenue, out Pasadena Avenue to St. Pete Beach, and then on the return trip, Pasadena Avenue to the First Avenue South corridor as it returns eastbound. Now, we're fortunate to give a presentation very similar to this to the City of St. Petersburg on April 21st. At that time, the City of St. Petersburg did accept the study and also instructed their city staff to move forward with zoning amendments and changes to take these recommendations and bring them forward into the urban stations, particularly including the 22nd Avenue corridor. And we certainly appreciate the leadership of several individuals here who helped move that process forward. We'll be presenting this also in a work session to the City of South Pasadena next Wednesday, where they will consider moving forward with acceptance of the study as well. It's been almost a 2-year process at this point, where we followed a fairly traditional planning process of looking at existing conditions, working with stakeholders and residents in the corridor to foster a redevelopment vision, create area-specific plans for each of the transit stops, and then forward with implementation action items. Throughout this process, we've had a significant amount of public engagement. While that has looked a little bit different because most of this has taken place during the pandemic, it's been a very high quality, and we've done everything from corridor-wide workshops to station area workshops to meetings with specific interest groups along the corridor. So the body of documents as a whole is actually one study, but 3 documents. And those 3 documents were very purposeful because they moved from east to west. One document focused on the downtown and urban stations in the higher intensity core of the city of St. Petersburg. A second document that looks at the village and neighborhood stations farther west on the corridor. And then a third document that isolates specifically the recommendations for the city of South Pasadena so that it can be adopted in separate bodies. Each of the volumes works through the place types, the overall philosophy and structure of the future of transit-oriented development within Pinellas County, outlines the engagement efforts and the input that we receive from the community, and then walks through implementation strategies by each station, as well as a series of appendices in the back that look at mobility, regulatory policy, equity considerations, and other key elements of the plan. So as we've approached this effort, one of the most important items is that this is not a one-size-fits-all approach. This has been a very strategic effort to look at different sections of the corridor, their existing character, their future development potential, and how we continue to foster growth and development in a way that maintains the character and the core of each of these stations and neighborhoods. So because of that, Sunrunner Rising lays out 4 different place types, from urban to neighborhood, that reflects and respects the character, the scale, and the history of each segment along the corridor. But it also recognizes that the market and economics play a key role in development and community growth and development. So beyond just the characteristics, we've also looked at the short-term market potential of each of these station areas and used that to create a framework that both reflects the market activity in the areas of need today, the equity considerations to limit displacements and foster a corridor for everyone, but also a flexible framework that as the corridor evolves over the next 5, 10, 20 years, that its policies and its regulations can evolve likewise so that we build out from these transit stations to create complete communities. So with that as the foundation, Jared's going to walk you through a few of the recommendations, looking at our policy recommendations, our infrastructure recommendations, and then finally, opportunities for additional partnership.
Thank you so much, Eric, and really excited to be here. This has been quite a process going for a while now. So as Eric mentioned, I'm going to dive through these 3 different buckets, if you will, the policy, the infrastructure, and the partnership recommendations. You know, Eric did a good job of talking about the place types, and these stations are not all the same. So really what we did, we built off of the place types and identified different types and of character and style of development. Moving from, on the right, downtown St. Pete is different than the urban stations in 22nd and 32nd Street. And then the neighborhoods are different as well. We had different things to consider there, as well as the village stations, which are in South Pasadena. So this started to set the framework for zoning and regulatory changes that could be made. This is really just an example. This we talked a little bit about US 19 earlier. This shows the 32nd Street station and the look and feel of what that could look like. We also have Inclusivity that worked with us on this study, LaShante and Eric Smith. And really what we looked at is providing workforce and attainable housing was a big deal. So how do we do that? We had different bonuses on top of the existing regulations. So that was a big part of the plan. And then just greater flexibility of uses. That kept coming up over and over again. So with all the stations, we looked at a potential build out, really wanted to see a lot of times we talk about what's above the ground, but what's under the ground, what kind of development could we support? So that was something that we were keenly interested in. And then we looked at what are the potential growth with these changes. So St. Pete, anywhere from 10 to 17,000 units, and this could happen over 20, 25, 30 years. In South Pasadena, a little smaller, 600 to 2,500 units. And really, this kind of falls in line with Fort Pinellas' projections. So again, the stations, we all know they're not created the same. This is an exhibit we developed really to look at the policy and regulatory piece. And Eric alluded to the 22nd Street station, had a lot of discussion on that. So on the image on the left, we looked at half-mile corridor or half-mile study area of the regulations. And obviously, this will be tailored as we go through the zoning changes, or as the city goes through the zoning changes. And then within, on the right, we're showing in the neighborhoods, really wanted to have and maximize the development in a tighter area around these particular neighborhood stations. This image really just wanted to show you what we're talking about when we come up with recommendations. We're looking at the standards. And for South Pasadena, their plan dives into a little bit more detail since St. Pete already has a lot of the standards. But we're talking about how do we meet the street? What are the building types? What are the sizes, the sidewalks? So the plan lays out some specifics on all of those standards. Okay, so now moving into the second piece, and this one's near and dear to my heart, infrastructure, and how do we talk a lot about how do we get people to and from the stations, that first and last mile, north and south of the Sunrunner. So that was a big part of the plan, was really to identify shared facilities for parking, bike connections, trail connections, sidewalks, all of that. So, and a lot of that is already happening. So that's a big part of the implementation plan. Third item, really from the recommendations, the third topic is some of the equitable considerations. We talked a lot about the housing affordability, and I alluded to that already. But we talked about density bonuses and height increases, and so that's identified in the plan. And area median income, we talked about looking at potentially a community-based AMI in the future. So there's a number of strategies that are identified related to partnerships, particularly affordable housing. So we talk a lot about infrastructure, but what about community, asset building and neighborhood services? That was something else that was mentioned as far as community benefits or different workforce and employment opportunities. So there's a section in the report on that piece as well. Something else that we talk a little bit about with this opportunity, the capital investment that was made on the First Avenues, how do we continue to maintain that? So funding strategies was a big deal. We talked about value capture models for 25 years out, and there's several models that members of the team that worked on developed special assessment strategies. So there's 3 that are identified that look at assessments around the stations and how can we use that to really help fund the Sunrunner over time, because it's more than just the capital investment, it's how do you maintain it. So Eric talked a little bit about this already, where we're at right now. We're here for acceptance today. These recommendations are being built into, this image shows the South Pasadena Comprehensive Plan, which will be updated. St. Pete is moving forward with the zoning regulations along 22nd Street and talking about 32nd Street. This is getting built up into St. Pete Vision 2050. And then really there's a whole host of other things happening that these recommendations influence, such as the 22nd Street corridor study, the Teal study, as well as Tropicana Field. So a lot of great work has gone on, and really we're excited to kind of see things moving forward. And as Eric mentioned, we'll be going to the city of South Pasadena next week, and several PSTA meetings coming up here in the future. So with that, we'll open up with any questions you might have.
Does anyone on the board have any questions? Commissioner Mertz?
Yes, hi. Very nice presentation, thank you. Early on in the beginning, you had 4 different regional areas that is being tracked. Can you go back to that slide? There was
Sure.
just something there that I'm not sure.
Back here?
Yeah.
I think it was this one, correct?
Yes. And then go forward one where it talked about the heights. Yeah, that one, I guess, just surprised me that downtown had listed as 2 stories, which traditionally in downtown it's much higher in stories, whereas the
Where we're getting there is,
neighborhoods.
sorry, I was just going to say that's a minimum of 2 stories, so much higher scale there. Really just incentivizing folks not to do the one-story smaller development.
But minimum, okay. And then the village is maximum of 8 stories. Those were put into effect with discussions with the local communities?
These are recommendations. They have not been implemented into the comprehensive plan or the regulations as of yet. That's the next step.
Okay, so You know, I can see where in some of the spots downtown, everything is larger, of course. When you get out towards the beaches, where the villages and neighborhoods would be with the higher heights, I was just wondering how much buy-in has occurred in
Sure.
that discussion.
Yeah, and so these are ranges. There's definitely been a lot of discussion, particularly in South Pasadena, about how high is too high. So 5, 6 stories been kind of, the sweet spot for them. St. Pete, I know we've talked about particularly the urban stations. Those could be, we show 8 to 12 here. In certain sections, could it be 5, 6, maybe they're 8, and it comes up to 12. So there's really, it's just a toolbox and variation within them.
So at this point, these are strategies, but the local communities would be able to set.
That's right.
Under these.
Correct.
If they chose to, or
That's right.
maxed if they chose to as well. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, Commissioner Edgards?
Yeah, I guess my question, great presentation, by the way, was along the same lines. On that same page you had, and I was looking at the urban, well, other ones were max and one was min. This was specific 8 to 12. So we're not talking about like a 6-story. It has to be in that range, in that area. That's my understanding from that.
There, you could have a 6-story. Where we're going there is you could have a maximum of 8 stories in certain sections. So it really gets into a much greater detail. So within each station area, you could have 8 station maximum in certain areas that maybe are closer to the street. And then you transition back further from the street, and maybe you can do 12 stories in certain areas. Those are the kind of mechanics that'll get worked out in the
But
next.
that's the range.
There should still be a max there.
Okay.
The top end of the maximum is a range at the urban stations
Okay.
with a variety of factors, but
Okay.
that is still the max.
Thank you. And then maybe just a comment, I think you also touched on that, and I saw Councilmember Gabbard speaking to it as well, the bubble on page 10 that talked about the quarter mile and half mile. Obviously, that's just kind of a conceptual, and the idea being that, I guess, depending on the zone that you're in, there'll be considerations, at least up to a quarter or up to a half mile, for changes by the local groups.
That's right. The urban was really where we broadened it up quite a bit, and that came from discussion with St. Pete City Council, and then obviously that would be tailored as you get into the zoning changes, and then the tighter, more consent circle around those neighborhood stations.
Those kinds of meetings will be interesting to listen to or hear about, because those will be, I would think, some controversy, but okay, thank you.
Commissioner Gabbard?
To that point, Commissioner Eggers, so something like this, say for instance, on the 22nd Street corridor, may not necessarily look like a radius. It's going to look, about something that is going to be drawn in a way that it's not going to break out blocks, and it's not going to, go necessarily across the trail. So just making sure, like, we're asking staff at this point to come up with those zoning classifications and what makes sense for each station, and then they'll be bringing that back to us, I think, at the end of May. Correct? And so we'll be having those conversations to really get staff to now take the recommendations and apply them and make them reality. So more to come.
Rodney, do you have anything that any comments you want to add on this presentation? I know that you were involved too. Anything that you want to add, or you're good? Okay. Anyone else have any? Councilmember Driscoll?
Thank you. I just want to mention what a fantastic job they've done. I mean, it has been, it's been a process, and we've had some changes. We've had some times when we didn't necessarily agree, with what was being presented, but we worked through it together. And I've got to say, these guys are just fantastic to work with. And we're at the point now where I feel really good about what we have planned, and how this will guide our visioning process moving forward as we start to look at zoning changes and those sorts of initiatives that will really take not only help to connect more people more easily with the Sunrunner, but to create jobs along that corridor and residential along that corridor to create a well-rounded approach to better quality of life and better economic development in our city and beyond. So having the guidance and the knowledge of these folks standing side by side with us as we work on it has been invaluable. And so I wanted to take the opportunity to thank you all. And, you know, I can't wait to see what we do next together.
Well, that was very nice.
I wasn't always nice, so I figured now we're done.
Well, that's a great segue, and so I just wanted to let everybody know that, you know, one of the intents of this in partnership with PSTA has been to take these recommendations as sort of a template for how we may apply them in other parts. Not that you would have the same, you know, village, neighborhood, and the same scale somewhere else, but the overall construct is a useful guide to the other investment corridors that we've identified in our Advantage Pinellas plan. And to that point, based on the good work that these folks have done, and as a former consultant, I appreciate always hearing that feedback, we've selected them to do the Alt 19 corridor transition plan from Clearwater down south to the Sunrunner, which is a very different context and doesn't have the same level of transit investment, and maybe a few more challenges with the communities along that route. But I think this will be a great opportunity to build on this success as we start looking at the transit network that we need in Pinellas County and the development that can support the ridership of that transit system. So I know the county's happy about it. I know Largo is very interested in the Alt 19 corridor transition plan, and it sounds like we've got a great consultant to help us with that work.
Okay, Tina, are there any members of the public who'd like to speak?
No, Madam Chair, there is not.
Okay, well, then we will close this, and we need the board to accept the study, so. Okay, did we get that? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. We will now go to the 60, the draft transportation priorities. And Chelsea, are you there? I don't like not seeing your face. Kind of aggravates me.
Yes, I'm here. Sorry about that.
I want to be able to
Next time I'll
touch
make
you.
sure- Next time I'll make sure the children are not sick so I can be there in person.
Oh, okay, okay.
All right, Tina, can you confirm, is my screen showing in the room?
Yeah,
Yes.
Chelsea, it is.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, thank you again for having me. I'm going to walk through the transportation draft, the draft transportation priority list for you today. It's probably really, really small on your screen, so I do want to encourage you to look at it in your packet if you have it available. We are not seeking any action on this today. We just really wanted to be able to bring this to you as a heads up and get your comments and feedback before we go ahead and finalize it, and we'll bring it back to you as an action item at your meeting next month. So the first one we're going to walk through is the multimodal priority list. And just a little reminder on these lists, we leave projects on the list until they are 100% complete. And then just in case it needs a little extra money, something comes up, we want to make sure it's done before we take it off the list. So that's why at the top of the list, you'll see on the proposed priority on the left, these are not numbered, it's just the letter P. And then one other thing I wanted to draw your attention to is on the far right-hand column, the source of the project. This is a new column that we've added this year based on feedback provided by you all that you ask, well, we did this plan or we did this study, what's happening? Where are the projects from it? So we wanted to really draw your attention to where the project on the list came from, if it's the long-range plan or active transportation plan or what have you. And then anything shaded on the list indicates that there was some kind of change from last time. So I'm not going to go over every single project on the list with you. I just kind of want to go over some of those changes so I can answer any questions that you may have on them. So the first one I want to draw your attention to is struck through the St. Petersburg Greater Downtown Area Network Analysis. That is complete, so it is being removed from the list. So that's why you'll see that one struck through. And then on the second page of the priority list, you're going to see 4 at the bottom that are shaded of the program section. And these are shaded because these are all funded in the draft tentative work program. The work program will be approved by you all next month. So we're moving these up to the funded portion. 3 of these projects came from the Pasadena Avenue Corridor Study, and then one of them is the St. Pete Complete Streets Project. This is that $1 million that you all provided to St. Pete last year for the Complete Streets grant. When we move into the unfunded priorities, just as a reminder, anything that we want FDOT to take a look at first and fund first, we include at the very top. These are our off the top priorities. So you'll see that we have 1 and 2. These are planning funds that's utilized by both us and Florida Department of Transportation for transportation studies. The 3 is bus replacement funding that we provide to PSTA. 4, this is a 62nd Avenue Complete Streets project. This is the new one that you all just approved at your meeting, I believe, last month for the $1 million grant. And again, this is why these are all at the top of the project. We want to be able to make sure that we're lining these projects up for the new 5th year of the work program. And just as a reminder, these priorities that I'm presenting today, when you see the work program next month, that work program is based off of last year's priorities. These priorities here we're going to turn over and hand to FDOT after our meeting next month, and they'll develop the next work program out of this list. So I just wanted to clarify that a little bit. 5 and 6, these are priorities actually out of the active transportation plan, where we've committed to advancing active transportation projects from that plan in sequential order, as the priority list allows for it. So these did receive partial funding or some phasing is underway. 8 and 9, these are the trail connections to the Howard Franklin Bridge. These were already on your priority list last year, but we did receive a request from FDOT to elevate them. Now that the Howard Franklin Bridge is under construction, we really want to make sure we can expedite these connections so that when people come over from Tampa, maybe across the Howard Franklin, they're not just dumped onto either Ulmerton Road or 4th Street, and they have somewhere safe to walk or ride their bikes. Moving on to the next page, 15 is the Gulf Boulevard sidewalk improvements in the Indian Shores area. Again, this one was already on your priority list last year, but we've elevated the priority. The city has now, or the town has come to an agreement with FDOT on what those improvements will look like. So now that that's settled, we'd like to get the project going. So we've elevated the priority a bit to hopefully get it where it needs to go. 16 and 17, those are new priorities from the active transportation plan. We try to feed these on kind of slowly because there's only so much money and we can't fund everything all at once. However, with the new infrastructure bill having been passed, we think that there is an opportunity for some potential new funding. So we wanted to add on a few extra projects this year to hopefully get them moving forward. Just under number 20, it used to be 21, you'll see that the Clearwater Busway is struck through. This was a grant that was received from the federal government to study some kind of busway connection between downtown Clearwater and Clearwater Beach. Over the course of that study, the city and the state were unable to come to an agreement on what that busway would look like, where it would go, and also what was an acceptable level of environmental impact. So because the project came to an impasse, the city has asked us to remove it from the priority list, and they're going to seek transit connections in another way that do not include the busway. And then at the very bottom, 36 and 37, these are 2 new priorities. These projects came out of our annual call for projects. We did receive 3 applications. One was from T-BARDA, and they're already on the priority list near the top. And then we received this request from Pinellas Park for 78th Avenue North for multimodal corridor improvements. This is a direct result of the funding we provided them for a concept plan for Complete Streets 2 years ago. And then a request from Pinellas County to improve Bel Air Road from Keene over to US 19. So those are all the changes for the multimodal priority list. And I'd be happy to take any questions at this time from anyone that has any on these projects.
Any questions for Chelsea? Okay. Mayor Bujalski, do you have any, would like to speak to you?
Hey, Chelsea.
Hey there.
The Skinner project is showing as being funded in 25-26. I thought that got moved up a little bit.
I will double check on that and
It
update
did.
the spreadsheet.
Yeah, it did. I know it did.
Yeah, it should be
All right, I'll
24, I
fix
believe.
that.
Yeah. Thank you.
right, thanks.
Commissioner Edgar?
Yeah, I guess I'm looking at, I just would be remiss in not bringing up number 26 again. It seems so far down the list, and that's the bridge overpass on 580 and the trail. And I'm just going to keep saying that, two things. One, 580, we're putting another light. We already have lights on both sides of it, so we're putting another light to slow traffic down more. 580 is about moving traffic. And secondly, I don't know where we've gotten to the point where when we cross 6 and maybe 7 lanes with turning lanes, that we don't have an automatic bridge put in there. But that's obviously where we're not at this point. But I think wherever we can, that needs to elevate. I mean, we're continuing to expand the trail, and that's okay. But I think we got to make sure that we do it safely as we expand it and not get too far out ahead of ourselves. So again, just a little bit concerned with how far down the list, unfunded. And so just by my comment, thank you.
Anyone else? Whit, is the project that I have the gentleman from St. Pete call me all the time? Is that on there somewhere?
It's not our project. It's not being done with federal and state funds. This
Okay.
is 71st Street.
71st.
Between 54th Avenue and 46th Avenue.
Shout out to my St. Pete people.
Yeah,
This
and-
man calls me all the time,
And
for like 4 years.
I think we had Joan Rice in the audience somewhere, but I know that's in the county's capital improvements program
Okay,
to add sidewalks and other improvements.
in that area, it's
Yeah.
very dangerous, so
So it's working
he's
its
not
way.
making it up.
So you will see that, well, you already saw it in the fall update of the TIP, and if there's any changes, we'll make that update this fall. But it's progressing.
Thank you. Okay, so this
I-
is not
I-
a vote?
Can I, no, we
Yes,
don't
you
need a
may.
vote.
No,
I just want to mention that this list is getting a little long, but we are optimistic and hopeful that with the infrastructure law being passed, starting pretty darn soon, this next month, there's going to be a notice of funding opportunity, and then they'll start rolling more of these out, and then we should see more dollars in some of our program areas that cover these projects. So I think you'll see a lot of momentum on many of these transportation projects, which should free up opportunities for more projects to be added in coming years. So just kind of keep in mind that it's going to get a big shot in the arm to get some of these projects done, and your overpass would be one of those we would look for funding for.
And just, Whit, you had mentioned a meeting before that there's a set of bridges that we're talking about. Could you just go over that real quickly, what that priority is?
The set of trail bridge
Yeah,
crossings,
yeah.
there's one over Roosevelt at 28th Street in the Caroline area that I think is our top priority. Then Chelsea, if you're still on the line, maybe you can remember the second one. I can't remember that one.
Yeah, the second one is on State Road 60.
That's right.
Yep, State Road 60 by the Home Depot. The one after that is Duke Energy overpass at 4th and Gandy. And so those are the other ones that are on the list at this time, including the 581.
Yeah, and the issue with the Duke Energy crossing at the Home Depot, it's at Northeast Coachman or Old Coachman, I haven't been here long enough to know the difference, is when you get the trail crossing walk signal and you can cross, you still have cars coming southbound, making a left there, who do not pay any attention to the bicyclist or pedestrians crossing. The difference between that location and the 580 crossing is where that trail crossing is, you don't have any of those turning movements at that location. So I think it's a little safer there, but your point's well taken, and we want to get all of these big roads crossed where we can.
We don't have road intersection, but we do have fairly large developments that dump out right there, right near that light.
Nearby.
So, yeah.
Right.
Okay,
Any
thank
other-
you.
Any other feedback on the transportation priorities? And we'll see it in June and we'll make a motion and.
Madam Chair, I'm
Yes.
sorry. So far, Chelsea's only covered the multimodal priorities, and there's 3 other sets, and I just wanted to make that reminder for you.
Sorry, Chelsea. You
That's
may
all right, I'm still
proceed.
here. All right, the second list I'm going to cover with you today is our transportation alternatives priority list. Transportation alternatives funding it's a pretty limited pot of money, and the projects have to be bicycle or pedestrian related. And there's a lot of conversation about overpasses, but because this pot of funding is so limited, if we were to put an overpass on this priority list, it would probably take about 3 or 4 years to get it funded and no other projects would move forward. So that's why on this list, you're going to see smaller trail segments. And we do have a few changes to the list this year. We are removing, it says here Oldsmar Trail Extension is crossed out. That's actually an error. We're going to fix that before your next meeting. They do need a little bit more time on that project, so that will remain on the list. But the section, the Duke Energy Trail North Gap segment from Sunset Point up to Enterprise, that has been completed, so it is coming off the list. And I'd also like to point out the 71st Street Trail in the St. Petersburg portion from the trail up to 38th Avenue. That section is receiving some TA dollars, and the city is undertaking that project. And we are working closely with the city and the county to make sure when they each do their respective segments, they line up when they connect. So one stop trail on the east versus the west side and whatnot. At the bottom of this page, you're going to see 5 shaded priorities. These are all TA projects that you all prioritized last year that have received funding. We were very, very successful in getting a lot of our TA projects into the 5-year work program this go around. So we're really, really happy about that. We were able to advance them all. When we get to the unfunded portion of the list, the top priority, this is a holdover from last year, but 2, 3, 4, and 5, those are all new projects. And we don't usually add 4 projects at a time, but the dollar amount on these was pretty, on a couple of these was pretty low. And in addition to that, with the new funding coming from the infrastructure bill, there is an additional funding source just for TA. So we were pretty confident that we could get a lot of these projects funded. So we wanted to move them all ahead in this priority. 2 from the city of St. Petersburg on 6th Street and also 28th Street. Pinellas County is seeking some funding for the Joe's Creek Trail. And then the city of St. Pete Beach is requesting funding for sidewalks in the Sunset Way area around Quarry Avenue. So those are all the updates that we have on TA, and I'd be happy to take any questions on those projects.
One quick question.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, Chelsea, that you mentioned something about the trail crossing on Sunset Point. And I was just trying to find it before we left this. I wanted to see, is there anything planned for that, or have we had any more observations about the operation of that crossing? Are we comfortable with that? Is there anything else that needs to be done?
We actually just had a meeting with our consultant last week about that very project, and Rodney Chapman and I sat in on that. We've just finished the observation phase. They literally just sent over the files yesterday, so we do plan to bring you back a progress report on that at your June meeting, and if not June, then in August.
Okay, thank you, Chelsea.
You're welcome.
Anything else, Chelsea?
Not on this list. If you all are done with questions, I'll move on to the next
Any
one.
questions for Chelsea? Okay, you can move forward.
All right. And this is 2 in 1, so I won't cover both lists. We'll put them together. But many of you may be aware, we have the Suncoast Transportation Planning Alliance. The SCTPA is our regional NPO body that covers Hernando, Citrus, Pasco, Pinellas, Polk, Hillsborough, Sarasota, and Manatee counties. And each year, the SCTPA comes together and develops a priority list for all the projects of regional significance, so that we can collectively advocate for these high dollar, big regional projects. As a subcommittee of the SCTPA, we have the Transportation Management Area Leadership Group, and I apologize for all the acronyms. So the TMA covers the 3 counties, and the SCTPA covers the broader region. So the TMA actually adopts the priorities for the urban core, and then the SCTPA adds in the outer counties to the priority list and then endorses the entire list. So you'll see 2 in your packet, but really the TMA is just the subset of the SCTPA. So on this priority list, you'll see the funded regional projects at the top, again, leaving those on until they're completed. And you'll see a lot of really big projects on here. We've had a lot of success working together to advocate for various projects. And then at the bottom are the top priorities that are currently unfunded. In Pinellas County, you'll see the 275 express lanes from I-375 up to Gandy Boulevard, regional rapid transit in the I-275 corridor. And those are the two big ones that really touch on Pinellas County, but you can see the other projects for the rest of the region that are on there. So the SCTPA took action to approve this. And as a matter of process, we do bring it back to the respective MPO bodies to further ratify it. And then we'll transmit it over to FDOT for consideration as they develop the next work program. And that's it for the regional list. And I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Any more questions for Chelsea? Commissioner Edgars?
Yeah, Whit, maybe you can answer. Chelsea, maybe you can answer. But I was just looking at the top priorities for the Tampa Bay region for TMA. And I'm assuming that it got massaged a little bit when it went to the SCTPA. Get all these letters right. So that State Road 5441 rose up on the list versus where we looked at it from a more local priority. Just maybe some of your thoughts on that and how that kind of unfolded.
Let's see, you're talking about 5441?
Yeah, that intersection improvement was what is it, 4th or 5th on our list, the TMA list, and then when it got down to SCPT, it actually rose above, went all the way up to number 3. So I was just curious how some of the comments on it, not really.
Well, I think, first of all, we don't put these in numerical order because there may be different levels of readiness for some of these projects. And so I wouldn't put too much into where it is on this list.
That answers that
question.
question.
I think that answers it.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, great, thank you.
Anyone else have any questions? Okay, we have no action on this. And Chelsea, do you want any other feedback? Are you happy with what you heard today?
Yeah, I think I'm all set. Thank you all for your time.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to 6E, Pinellas Planning Council preliminary budget discussion. And now Rodney gets to come forward. Yay.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board. I want to save my powder for this discussion. But in all honesty, just quickly about the TOD team, I was fortunate to be part of that and learned a lot. I think we had a lot of good in-depth discussions about a lot of challenging issues, and I'm really happy that the work is being so well received because it was a lot of hard work and a lot of hard discussions amongst the team. So with that, let's talk about budget. I'll try to keep this interesting and engaging, but we are at a point where we need some guidance from the board because in the time that I've been here and been tasked with this responsibility, this is the most challenging set of circumstances that we have. So let's dive right in and talk about the budget and how it's shaping up. Before I go into the numbers, just keep in mind that these are preliminary numbers at this point. The final budget numbers that you'll see both in June and in August will be different than this. But we're at a point now where I can give you a snapshot and talk about some scenarios that we need your consideration on. So if you look at our expenditures first, meaning what we spend our money on, the biggest part of our budget is our staff. So our salaries and benefits consume about $2.6 million roughly of that pie. And going counterclockwise, from there in blue, it's our budgeted contingency or reserve. So the board has established a policy of a minimum of 10% of those expenditures should be dedicated and held in an account every year. In the gold color there, about $342,000 is, for the purpose of this discussion, I just collapsed about 12 line items into other expenses. So that's things like rent, telephone, mailing, equipment and furnishings, and things like that. Those costs are generally fixed and don't move a lot from year to year. Going on in gray is something you hear me talk about a lot, is the intergovernmental service charges. It's over $400,000 at this point, and that is, again, something that we pay to the county for various services relative to human resources, county attorney representation, information technology access, and the like. Going down from that in orange is the contract support services line item. That is, again, a line item that moves from year to year depending on the nature of our work. That's where we put money in for consultant work, as well as some of our special technical assistance that we provide to our local government partners. So in that line item, you would have found our planning and placemaking grant pilot program, as well as funds for our urban design services pilot program. So again, the bottom line with this slide is about $2.6 million just to pay our staff is what it looks like. So the key points, we have a really good dynamic staff, very capable, very dedicated to the work, but our number of staff has not grown since the merger. In putting this together, I had to go back as far as 1995 just to understand the evolution of the Planning Council. And so, for example, back in 2017, there were 20 staff positions, 16 were filled, 4 were vacant, and we're at 15 staff members right now with a couple of openings. Again, I talked earlier about the board reserve policy there of 10%. And then what was interesting, at least to me, was the intergovernmental service charges and how they have grown to consume more of our budget each year. So prior to FY16, there was no intergovernmental service charges that the PPC was paying to Pinellas County, and it shows up there in FY16 at about $90,000, and it has escalated every year to where it's well over $400,000 for fiscal year 23. And as I said before, those local government assistance services that we provide are typically budgeted for in the contract support services line item.
Rodney, wait 1 second.
Yes.
Why has it gone up so much over the years?
That's a good question. I'll do my best to answer that. I think in theory, the intergovernmental service charges, and it's not just us, every department pays this charge. It's just to varying degrees. For example, we're at our budget kickoff back in January, and Public Works made the same point I'm making about the fact that these charges are consuming more and more of our budget. But they're designed for the county to be compensated for providing certain services to appointing authorities and departments. Okay. So looking at the revenues, you'll see here that we split out the MPO revenues. You see there, that's in blue, about $1.3 million. And then the tax revenue the PPC receives from the millage is another $1.4 million. So that's about $2.7 million right there from those two revenue sources. We typically have had a pretty large amount of funds that we carry forward from fiscal year to fiscal year. And for this preliminary outline, it's a little less than $700,000. In a small sliver of orange, you'll see that there's $19,000 of local assistance revenue that we plan to receive this coming fiscal year. Mayor Kennedy, you asked about us charging for those services, and that is what we estimate we will receive for things like providing those comprehensive plan updates to the 8 communities that we're planning to do work for in the upcoming fiscal year. And then we do have a small amount of money in an interest-bearing account, and that's, we don't receive a whole lot of revenue from that. So that's the revenue pie for the agency. In looking at sort of the situation, a couple of things that we wanted to share with you is, for those of you that have been around for a while and were here pre-merger, you will remember that there was a lot of expectations that there'd be cost savings when you merged the MPO with the PPC. For those of you that weren't around, there was no millage adjustment that was made when the two agencies were merged. Furthermore, as I told you back in fiscal year 16, when intergovernmental service charges were instituted, there was, again, no additional revenue adjustment to account for this new cost that the agency would incur. I think, as you've heard me say many times before, we're at 9% of our statutory cap, and the board and the Board of County Commissioners did lower the millage back in 2016 as a mechanism to, again, reduce costs to the taxpayer. Our revenues that we receive from local assistance projects isn't a defined revenue source, so it varies from year to year. We will take in more local revenue next year, primarily because our cities are statutorily required to update their comprehensive plans. And so that's the trigger by which we will do more technical assistance in the upcoming year than we typically do. And lastly, just driving home this point, since the merger, in most years, we have used carryover funds to balance the budget, meaning that we don't take in enough revenue to cover our expenditures. And so we have to have money that rolls over into that next fiscal year to make us whole. So for fiscal year 23, in several meetings with the Office of Management and Budget, we've talked quite a bit about what we call the structural imbalance in the PPC budget. So for this year, with the outline that we've been working on, the deficit is about $332,000. And faced with that, we looked at how can we reduce our expenditures to help close that gap. And so we had looked at perhaps the board amending your contingency or reserve policy to reduce that amount from 10% to 5%. However, one of the things that was interesting to me as I sat through the Board of County Commissioners meeting yesterday was the county's audit. And there was a discussion about the county's amount of reserves relative to reserves that you would need to, in case of an emergency or hurricane, something like that. And so the clerk talked about you wanting to have about 2 to 3 months worth of expenses in a reserve account so that you can cover those costs in case you don't have those revenues in. So even though we talked with OMB about something like that, I'm a little wary of that because if we do have a rainy day, no pun intended, we still would need to have money set aside to be able to cover our operating costs for at least that 2 to 3 month period. And we've done some number crunching, and for us, it's about $300,000 to $400,000 that we need to have in reserve just as that rainy day fund. We had also identified 6 positions that are currently vacant, and if we were to eliminate all of those, that would give us some additional cost savings. And then we have been talking with Chelsea and her group about using some of the MPO funds to cover some of the costs that we typically would have covered through PPC revenues, and have worked with the department to make sure that we could have that cost sharing occur. So that would be for the USF fellowship agreement where we have the student with us for the fall and spring of the upcoming academic year. And then there's certain tasks that are related to the investment corridor transition plan that Whit talked about earlier that could be covered by MPO revenues. But doing that does really impact our ability to be responsive to not only the countywide role that we serve, but also being that that facilitator and that helper for you with your local issues, because we then don't have the amount of staff that we would need or the resources that we have used in the past to help address these issues. So with that, I'm just going to talk about a few different scenarios. And again, just think about this at a high level. These are round numbers that we have put together with OMB just to talk about different approaches that we could take and get your input on what makes the most sense from your perspective. So under this scenario A, the assumptions that we have made would be to eliminate those 6 vacant positions. We have the board adopt a reduced reserve policy, but we keep the millage where it is now. And then have the MPO pick up more of the cost of some of those eligible expenses, as I talked about earlier. By doing that, we would still have a situation where our expenditures are exceeding our revenues, and we could have a balanced budget for FY23, but we wouldn't have enough revenues to cover our expenses, and so we would have, I won't necessarily say severe, but it would be some pretty serious financial impacts for fiscal year 24, because again, we don't have the funds to roll over into that year, as many funds to make us whole. Scenario B is, again, eliminating those vacant positions, having a reduced reserve policy, but then looking at a millage adjustment up to 0.0200. and then have the MPO conduct that additional cost sharing. This would allow for us to sort of have our revenue, our expenditures covered by revenues, and then we'd have a little bit, a little less than $11,000 in money that we could carry over into a future fiscal year. And then the third scenario, scenario C, is not eliminating all 6, but only 3 of the 6. And that's important because from a staff resource capacity, there's needs that we have. So for example, I think we told you a while back that we promoted Jared from a program planner to a principal planner. And one of the vacant positions is his prior program planner position. And so right now, Jared is wearing both hats, both what he was doing as a program planner and his special projects planning role as well. We also have needs on our finance administration side of what we do, where we have had Joanne Jacobs, which you never saw Joanne because she didn't want to be out in public, basically. But Joanne retired earlier this year, and we have not filled her position. And so we have some of our finance staff, again, wearing many hats to make up for the fact that we have that vacant position. And in this scenario, we would increase the millage rate to 0.0220, and then again do the MPO cost sharing. And wanted to share with you that the millage rates that you see there under both scenario B and C were ones that we had worked with OMB to sort of calculate what would be the rate at which we would bring in enough revenue to cover our operating expenses and have, as you can see in this scenario, it's only $3,200 more. It's not out of the realm of what the PPC has had for a millage rate in the past. From 1995 up to, let's see here, 2007, the PPC millage rate was anywhere between 0.214 and 0.0220. Again, these scenarios aren't out of the realm of the recent past for the agency. And so I guess I'd like to stop there to see if there's any questions about any of the assumptions, any of the financial information I've shared so far. And once we end this part of the presentation, I'll just talk to you about sort of the next steps and where we'll need to be here in the next few months.
Rodney, can you clarify the reduced reserve policy? So you mentioned 300,000 to 400,000 is what you really like to have
Yes.
for 2 to 3 months. And is that 10%? How much is that?
The reason I don't like the percentage, Mayor, is because it fluctuates. So
Okay.
depending on the fiscal year that you're in, your expenditures could be, 300 well, let's say it could be $900,000 or $400,000. It all depends on how many, like what drives our budget on that end is special projects. So for example, this year we're doing the Target Employment Industrial Land Study Update and the Investment Corridor Transition Plan. Both of those studies together are about $800,000 worth of planning work, but we don't do that every year. So for us, having that 2 to 3 month benchmark based on traditional spending is a better way to do it as opposed to a percentage.
I don't even know who was here when we lowered it. I know I was. The 3 of us? So, no. So it was the 3 of us, and we reduced it. Yeah, no.
2016.
It was 16.
Yep.
And when we reduced it, it was with the discussion that when we needed to add funding again, that we would do that. It was never that it was going to stay that way. And as with everything that has to do with raising fees or lowering them, everybody's happy when you lower them. And then the minute you raise them, it becomes political, it becomes, it's just nuts. And so I'm just, I was there, I remember the discussion, And the reason we did it was we felt like we were in a very good position at that time. And it was from day one, it was for a period of time. We didn't know what that period of time would be, but it's over 5 years.
Yes. And I would just add that you probably recall me back in 2017 talking about this imbalance at one of our board workshops. And we knew it was out there, but it was a little bit of an unknown as to when would it be the time where we need to make some tougher decisions. The other point I wanted to leave with the board is that, there's been a lot of discussion about the bipartisan infrastructure law and the grant programs that are available to local governments as well as MPOs for certain types of activities. We had a webinar last week about, for example, the Safe Streets for All program. And one of the things we learned, which was not necessarily anything new, but there's a 20% local match. So if we want to draw down those federal dollars, we have to have a local revenue source to match it with, and the MPO can't be the source of that match. It's got to come from the PPC funds, and that's another reason why we need to take a look at our revenues that we bring in to make sure that we're able to use them for the intended purposes that align with the mission, vision, and goals of the agency.
Mayor?
Thank you. Just a couple of questions, and either Whit or you, feel free. So the number of open positions, can you just talk about, you explained about the one finance position. Can you just talk about why the other ones are open? Is it a, like everybody, none of us can find people to work?
Right.
Is that the issue?
That's a big part of it.
How long have they been open?
Jared's position, when did we promote Jared? It was last fall?
Yes.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
Where
So-
is Jared, by the way? I didn't see him today.
We didn't need him today.
I know, but.
He's back in the office doing 2 jobs. Jared is, it was a wonderful idea to promote him internally, but, we turned down a couple of other candidates who would have come in at that principal level. And we would have had somebody at that principal level and Jared back in it. But I think we did the right thing because, we want to keep him for a long, long time. The other issue is that people who are coming to us, particularly on the financial side, where we need a grants manager assistant to help Rebecca and Margie out, they're coming to us with 4 and 5 job offers.
Yes.
And the amount we're able to pay them is probably not anywhere close to what the private sector can pay these folks. And we like to talk about all the benefits we provide people, but our benefits tend to be skewed towards older employees and not new employees. That's been an issue that hopefully is getting resolved. But
That's the same problem we have.
Yeah.
Exactly, and we're talking about that.
if you're a
in some
30-year
studies.
employee of Pinellas County, the benefits are great. If you're a 2-year employee, they're not that great. So, we're struggling to bring in people at that level.
Do you feel like you can fill them all?
I feel like we can keep trying, but what we're going to have to do. Angela just announced her resignation. Her last day was last Friday. And, Angela is taking a substantially higher job in the federal government. She took a pay cut to come take this job. And we're probably looking at somebody with less experience and maybe lower, right out of school to take that responsibility. So it then requires that I step in and do more of that work, or Rodney does more of that work. And, we're willing to do it. But
So realistically, the 6 positions that do you think you can fill them over the next year?
I don't think we need 6. I think it's the 3.
So that's my next question.
3 is the right
The 3 you
number.
think is reasonable?
Yeah.
We're not asking you guys to kill yourselves, because everybody did that
Right.
at some point, everybody has to have some relief.
We're
COVID just killed
we're not
everybody.
empire builders here. I think we just want to do a good job and do it efficiently. I think our communications team of 1 probably needs a little help, and that's not included in the 3. I think Linda Fisher is doing a great job, but she's handling 8 or so of these local government contracts.
Job.
Yeah.
And, that's a lot on her plate, and Linda is probably our most experienced planner. So, it puts a strain on us. I could probably try to fill 6, but I think we're comfortable at this point with just the 3. and getting those 3 in, and if we get 3 good people, the rest of our staff is amazing. So
Right.
we need to complement the staff we have.
So my next question then, thank you for that, Whit, is, you know, those, we call them admin fees, whatever you call it, what you pay the Pinellas County government for the use of their services and everything. Last year, there was a whole negotiation about what those were going to be. What's happening this year? It went back to the old thing?
Well, the numbers Rodney presented to you are not yet final.
They're not, absolutely, they're not final, Mayor, and the OMB told me they're gonna go up. So, and again, I think as I told you in the past, these aren't current costs, so these are costs we incurred 2 years ago. And that's the framework that all county departments and appointing authorities operate under.
Except 2 years ago, we were in the middle of a pandemic and our costs are different than they are today. Right?
Well, I
They
think
have
we-
to be.
I think we were still using HR and information
Attorney
technology,
and-
probably more so because we were
Oh.
working all remotely.
Okay, so my point is you're gonna try to go talk to Barry and negotiate some of that, right?
Well, we've already had the
Maybe.
conversation with the county administrator. One thing Rodney didn't really cover is the property valuation.
Well, and that, we should get that May 30th or
yeah, it's coming.
31st,
Yeah,
right?
it's coming, and that'll be part of the factor. But, you know, our base is so small that even if that goes from, what's the assumption now, 6.8?
6.8.
6.8%.
Yeah, even if that goes from 6.8 to 11 or even 12, that makes a big difference in county government. It
Yeah,
doesn't
no, I
make a
get
big
it.
difference when you're, you know, dealing with a really small delta of a base.
Okay, and then just, I'm sorry, one real last question. You talked about more cost sharing with the MPO. I mean, I know that there is crossover, I do know that, but I won't begin to know exactly what that is. But if we're going to do more cost sharing with MPO, why aren't we already doing it? It feels like we're doing something maybe not, that's questionable. Or we'd already be doing it, wouldn't we?
We've already been doing it quite a bit.
But you're saying more.
Well,
That's-
so
right?
first of all, the board's direction when we lowered the millage rate in 2016 was to spend down our very large unassigned fund balance, which made sense because it was like
Right, and that's why we reduced the
1.5
millage rate.
million. And so the PPC was helping augment some of the MPO work back then. We are very limited in what the MPO funds can be spent on. So when we tell the Florida Department of Transportation that we've got a corridor study that is as much a redevelopment plan as it is a transportation plan, you know, they're going to look at us and say, okay, well, what portion of this is the transportation portion? What portion of this is redevelopment? And I look at it as it's all the same because it complements each other, and I can make that argument. But I think, you know, that's where we have to be mindful of the requirements and regulations.
Okay, I'll hold the rest of my comments to hear my colleagues.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Smith? No questions? Commissioner Edgars?
Yeah, I think this is going to be an interesting year in all of our budgeting processes. Because I'm hearing those numbers that you were talking about, increase in property value. So how we deal with that. And, you know, again, I think the counterbalancing comments always, you know, what are we going to do to our residents, right? I mean, you know, after this pandemic and after all these cost increases and first-time buyers are complaining about insurance cost increases, tax increases. So I know we talk about all this in that context too. So, I mean, so just a couple questions, Roddy. What do you have in for pay increase in the budget?
3%. It's the standard 3% cost of living adjustment.
That's what you have in now?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry? Which is now 8%?
With inflation.
Cost
yeah.
of living, I got you. And then the property value adjustments, that was my next question. We're going to get that.
Yeah, and Commissioner, I'm going to mention that on the subsequent slide because that is something that's out there that I want to make the board aware of because that does affect our property tax revenue projections.
Okay, and then I really want to know more about these insurance benefits that you talked about and how, you know, we are, and I always hear this average age of our employees here at Pinellas County is about 50, 52 years old. So the benefits seem to fit the average age. But we need to be getting younger. We're going to be getting younger. We're going to be getting more people in here that need the different kind of benefits. So maybe that's a conversation that we need to have also, just to
We
learn a little bit.
do have a benefits committee that has been meeting. It's been meeting for a really long time because Sarah Caper was on that committee, and she's been gone to Hillsborough County for over a year. But there was a little pause during the pandemic, but that committee is back in meeting, and I think Tina attended the last meeting for one of our staff. So we are on that committee and participating. The issue, frankly, is that we've had some younger staff who got pregnant and decided the benefits weren't that great at Pinellas County for young mothers, so they took another job somewhere else. And we're looking at sort of a menu or cafeteria plan, and there may be higher costs associated with that. I don't know, but that's something that's hopefully being worked out in next year.
But that's real-time adjustment right now. We need to be adjusting to them. I mean, it's so tough to get people right now. We're losing them, as you say, to the private sector. We're losing them to other government jobs. We're losing. So we need to be responsive, which is interesting because I was at a conference at the state level, and what they're doing for all state employees, is 5.8% increase. So this year, which again, I don't have the benefit of the history what they've been getting.
They haven't been getting much.
So they haven't. I don't even think they've been getting the 3%.
Right.
No. So this is kind of, I don't know that it's a makeup, but I think it's a little bit of a.
I haven't heard anything since the appointing authorities meeting, but when we all met with the county administrator and the clerk and all the other appointing authorities, the discussion was 3% was not going to be sufficient. And even, there was talk that even 7% probably wouldn't be sufficient, given where costs are rising. But, so I don't know. I haven't heard anything new, and 3% is what we've been told to assume. But we can certainly revisit that. But the problem is we can't revisit 3% without a millage increase.
Yeah.
Because that money's not coming from anybody else but us.
In any
Anything else,
event, just some, and then the cost sharing piece, I do think we need to talk to, the county about that piece.
Are you talking about the MPO cost sharing, or are you talking about the
I'm talking about the
intergovernmental?
intergovernmental thing, and also, to the point that you brought up about having the reserve levels. I mean, we've got beaucoup reserves, and quite frankly, that's a kind of a one-time thing. It's not like we just need to get those reserves bumped.
Right.
And whether they sit here or they sit there, they're excessive in some places and not enough in others. So anyway, just a thought and areas to work on, but I mean, it's going to be a fun budget season ahead.
So next month, this is not an action item. Next month, we'll need to take action on this, correct, Rodney?
Yeah, that's a good segue to the timeline. So the red arrow is where we are. So as we mentioned, we met with the county administrator last month and shared some of these challenges with him and his staff. We're going to have a different bit of a process going forward because of the fact that we canceled the July board meeting. So what we will have you act on next month is a millage rate and budget. And you see that there in June. And then we'll follow that on with budget information session presentation in front of the Board of County Commissioners after our June board meeting. But then in July, the property appraiser will deliver the preliminary tax roll, which will then further modify those projected revenues that we will receive. And then we'll have to adjust the budget and bring it back to you for action on that amended budget in August, and then the following typical steps in September and October. But just lastly, and we've sort of touched on it, 6.8% was what we've been given as guidance, but we're hearing that the final taxable values could be in double digits. And so that's going to affect our revenue projections. And then lastly, we have asked OMB to help us calculate what the impact would be if we did raise the millage on the average single-family homeowner, and it's roughly $1.50, something in that realm. And we'll finalize and refine this number for future presentations, but I just want to give you a sense of that would be the impact on that.
Rodney, wait a couple,
Yes.
there's a few more questions. Let me get them for you, okay?
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Mertz? Okay. Brandy?
Thank you, and thank you, Rodney. Hearing a presentation and reading a presentation are very different, and so even though I knew what the conversation was going to be today, hearing you go through it, I think really just leaves us no choice, in my opinion. I mean, you gave us 3 budget scenarios, but to me, A and B does not feel sustainable. That's like a Band-Aid.
I call it a
Right?
can. I joked with our staff. I wanted to begin the presentation with a can and say we can't keep kicking it
Right,
down the road.
right. I mean, put a big Band-Aid over the side
Yeah.
of the slide, because to me, those two, I mean, yes, I know it's not politically popular to increase the millage rate, but it is our job as elected officials to be good stewards. And it's also part of our job, I think, just from, philosophical viewpoint, to take care of our people. Our people keep us running. I mean, we sit here and we praise our people all the time, but then we're talking about the fact that we have open positions, we have people wearing 2 hats, doing more jobs than they're really getting paid well for. 3% raises, I mean, that's nothing, especially in this climate. And so for me, it's kind of a no-brainer. I mean, option C, I think even that, I mean, I'm going to be wanting us to have a very in-depth conversation again this time next year about next steps, because I don't even see how C is sustainable for very long. So, I mean, I look back at, kind of how we got here. I wish we would have heard these alarm bells a little sooner. I feel like you tried to trickle it in here and there. You could see it coming. My ask as a board member, hopefully for the next few years, is that you give us this information much more readily and much, just say it, right? Like, don't beat around the bush. Because now we're sitting here looking at, really, to me, 2 options that really are not options. We have one option right now, and you said, what, $1.50 something?
Yes.
Is what it's gonna do to the average homeowner, property owner? I mean, to me, that is a no-brainer. So if this was an action item today, I'd be ready to move forward. I understand that it's not, but we have got to rectify this. We have got to get this taken care of, and we have got to take care of our people. So, thank you.
Commissioner Mertz?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of things. Obviously, it's good to hear the discussion and see the perspective by everyone. I guess I would like to know a little bit, when it says here that these intergovernmental service charges were instituted in FY17, and they have grown a lot. I was here in 14 through 16, so I wasn't really, I assume I know who they were implemented by, onto whom, but I'd like to know a little bit more about what that is. You look at the budget structure, 5% contingency is not acceptable to me. I tend to err on the conservative side, and if it wasn't for the fact that we printed $3 trillion and provided it out, we would all be in difficult situations that we would need reserves for. So I think cutting that down to 5% is not an acceptable item. But when you look at the expenditures, I mean, your area in blue, your contingency is less than this intergovernmental service charges.
Right.
Yes.
And so what that comes from, I would like to know more about that, and whether those are charges that are shifted to us, that ultimately would be collected anyway, or if they are type of charges then that we can competitively go out and go after if necessary to try to bring this number down, because whether we deal with it this time or next year or following years, it's just going up. And so apparently here. And so I guess those are just 2 observations that I also understand that we have to treat our people well and we have to pay them. And so the amount of the need when a increase is warranted, I'm not necessarily concerned about that. Obviously, the dollar amount and the impact is what's concerning, but the general notion of having to do it when it's necessary, I think is important. So also to show that you're doing responsible work, not only to the taxpayers, but also to all the people that work here and everything else. So just a discussion point that not only the contingency, but also the inter-service charges, I think are important for being addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Cliff. Commissioner Long?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I feel like I'm owning Commissioner Seal in this moment because she always talks about institutional history. Commissioner Eggers will know what I'm talking about. But I just wanted to share a couple things for purposes of context. Quite some time ago, in another chapter of my life, I was privileged to be appointed, you're all going to laugh when I say this, to Governor Jeb Bush's tax commission. And it kind of tickled me that little old me was going to serve on a tax commission, to the point where a reporter came up to me afterwards and said, "Janet Long, what are you doing here?" I said, well, as I look up and down this dais with all of the Fortune 500 companies that were sitting there, my answer was, I guess I'm here to represent the little guy. Everybody howled with laughter when they heard me say that. At the same time, Dr. Zengali, I don't know if anyone has been around long enough to remember who Dr. Zengali was, the director of the Department of Revenue. And between him and Governor Martinez, who some of you may remember tried to totally reform our tax policy in this state, remember what a mess that all turned into? Because here's what I learned. Florida, out of every state in the nation, has one of the most regressive tax policies in the country. Now, what does that mean? It means that when the economy is humming, everything is so hunky-dory. All the property taxes are going up, revenues are flowing into governments, and, you know, it's a free-for-all, some people think. And they can't wait to start spouting off from the dais. Let's reduce the millage rate. Let's reduce the millage rate. Oh, come on, we've got all this money. Let's reduce the millage rate. That is the worst public policy decision that you can make. And you know why? The reason you don't is because you know it won't be very long before it's going to go the other way. And when it goes the other way, you are in the tank, big time. And then you can't pay your bills, and lots of governments go under. So Whit and I have had this conversation a multitude of times, because I know on this agency, the decision was made a while back to reduce the millage rate. Well, now here we are. So I implore you, it's great to have all these conversations, and everybody gets to talk about what they think they should do, and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, though, as Councilor Gabbard said, we are here to be responsible stewards of not only the taxpayers' money, but of the welfare of our own staff who work so diligently and so hard for us. And on top of everything else, pay our bills appropriately. And so let's be responsible about how we go forward with this subject matter. The very idea that we're even talking about a 3% increase for our staff just makes the hair on the back of my head want to go up. Do you think we're going to keep any staff with a 3% increase when all they have to do is go down the street to the next government entity and get double probably what they're making here? It's unrealistic. The cost of living, if you just go to the grocery store, is up double digits. We have to do better by our people, or we're not going to have them. That's the bottom line. And I promise you, it's not going to be a 3%. when we start talking about our budget on the county commission. I mean, we can't go into it because Commissioner Eggers is sitting here, but I've had plenty of those discussions already with the county administrator and, and with our budget director as well. So we have to be real in how we approach this, okay? Sorry for waxing on, but I thought you might enjoy the
Councilmember
content.
Albritton, would you like to say something?
Sure, because I sign a lot of the checks over here, so I can tell you that, I agree with Councilmember Gabbard and Janet as well. We are stewards of this organization, and it's up to us to keep things running smoothly. And I think if we have to raise the millage, it's, everybody's in the same boat, whether you're from St. Pete County, Clearwater, we have a problem with keeping employees and finding employees because the private market is taking everybody because government just doesn't pay the same. And so, I think we have a responsibility to do what we need to do here. So I look forward to next month talking about it, and we get these reports in, voting on getting back on track for the future, not just a Band-Aid, but let's go ahead and tackle it and say, let's go ahead and do what we have to do to get back on track again.
Thank you, Councilmember Albritton. Is there anyone else who'd like to say something? I'm going to.
Didn't you last year tell us about your intergovernmental fees were going up because you were getting new technology? Did you get that new technology?
Yes,
Okay.
but the technology is always getting new. Newer, I should say. And that's the honest truth is there's always some, and I don't want to pour a lot of cold water on it because we do access, and we're probably the best or the most, the agency that uses the GIS resources out of any county department or appointing authority. So we do get a lot of value out of accessing those services, but we do pay a price for having that access.
Sure, and that's a private company that does that, and they get private wages. So they're not going to go down. That's the bottom line. They want to keep their people too. So, your intergovernmental fees probably are not going to go down much. And I have to say, it's been a pet peeve of mine my whole working career is to underpay people. I mean, people don't understand the cost of turnover. And if you would go and you would actually, just a police officer, for instance, in our town, it cost approximately $26,000 every time one of our officers leaves. And, people gripe about, oh my gosh, I don't want to pay $150. It's like, seriously, you would rather pay the $26,000? And this is a constant thing that, throughout my working career, I have looked at this, and I'm just such a proponent of paying people fairly and it's especially now you have to look at, because one of the biggest things people want is flexibility now. So there's different ways to incorporate your compensation package with, with money. And the caliber of work that's put out by these individuals here is, unbelievable. You don't want them to leave. You can't replace them. It's going to cost a lot of money. So for me, it's just ridiculous not to increase the millage and, get our folks to stay. To me, it's a no-brainer. But thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. Mayor Jowski?
I was just going to say to both of you, whatever you feel comfortable with on the reserve level, I understood what you said, and I also understood the opposite end. Whatever you feel comfortable, that's responsible, that you feel responsible with. You could feel good, you don't feel like could get screwed on it, if you will, pardon the French. I'm assuming that you get this guidance of what the raises should be from the county, and you don't have a flexibility with that, right? Or do you?
We're kind of bound to the unified personnel system,
Right.
but, we had a discussion at the last appointing authorities meeting. I don't know when the next one's scheduled. I don't think there is one scheduled, but I would imagine that we will have one in the summer, and we'll talk about that. Because most of the appointing authorities don't want to see one entity raise it by 5%,
But it's
another
going
one
to
raise
be
it by
that now
7%.
today. That everybody's going to be doing it. We're doing our own study. We've been working on it for the last 8 months.
So we try to be-
knowing this is coming.
We try to be consistent, and whether that's 5% or different number, we'll see. But this is just it's a placeholder.
No, I get it. Again, I leave that to all of you. Be reasonable, but be fair, given where we're going.
Oh, yeah.
The cost sharing, again, as long as it's ethical and legal, I don't care how you do it.
No.
Just do what you would do in any situation, is what I'm trying to say. Don't make special now and then you jump over here next year. Go negotiate with Barry, just like you did last year. And then, the end of May, get that number from the tax collector and come back and tell us, using those guidelines, which are fair, simple, reasonable. If we have to raise the millage, we got to raise it.
So just-
Again, for
Rodney, do you wanna
$1.50,
wrap
do I
up
want to do that?
What you're doing, you want to wrap up, and what, did you have one more thing?
I just want to say, we were at this point last year. This board was ready to vote for a millage increase
I
last
know,
year.
and then we came back and said no.
It might not have been 100%, but we were ready to vote on that. And so this is it's not really a surprise. We've been talking about this every year.
Yes.
But last year, the county administrator asked me not to do that and committed to the $50,000 local match that we no longer need for our FTA funds that we get for transit planning. So I'm going to hold him to the 50,000, even though we don't need it anymore. But that's part of how we make our budget work. But that was a favor he asked me last year because the county commission was looking at doing some things differently. But I can't keep doing that.
No.
So we've had that conversation.
Okay, Rodney. Thank you very much. I think you heard kind of where your next steps are, and you know what? You're doing a great job. That's not easy to come before someone with all of, that's a lot, and he's had to deal with that this whole year trying to figure it out, so I appreciate Rodney very
He's lost some sleep on it.
I know he has.
I want
I
to
know
thank the
he
board
has.
for the good comments you made about our staff. So thank you for that.
We'll go to 6E, which is the Pinellas Planning Council preliminary budget decision, which, no, we did that, okay. We'll go to 6F. You got me so worked up over that one. The Trails Community Study, hello.
I want to take a minute just to introduce Alex, our intern, our former intern, because his last day was, last Friday, right?
Yeah.
And Alex is now taking a job with Stantec in Tampa as an intern there. And he's... No, that's okay. He's
It was
an
a very
intern.
interesting, I was
It
like,
was
I'm a
only for
model
a
of what you're
year.
talking about.
But he's done a great job for us, and this was a big, important study. So go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, my name is Alex Burns, Madam Chair, Director Blanton, Board. It's a pleasure.
This is for you.
Oh, goodness.
Because we know that you're going to be leaving. and
Thank you.
We appreciate the internship that you did with us.
Thank you so much. It was such a wonderful experience. It was after a year of grad school, getting to spend time with Ford Pinellas and just the wonderful mentorship of everybody on the board, everybody at Ford Pinellas. It was a great experience to take what I was learning in school and really put it into practice. One of my big projects this year was to look at speeding conditions and e-bike conditions on the Pinellas Trail. I'm sure you have all heard comments, heard complaints, everybody. It's been a major topic of conversation online. So we really wanted to just have some data to help us guide this conversation for elected officials like you all, for county departments, Ford Pinellas, Public Works, and Parks and Conservation in particular, but just to have some hard data to guide these conversations to both give us a way forward as a county, but also to respond in more depth to our citizens who are having concerns about speed and safety conditions on the trail. So purpose and overview is, again, to respond to citizen concerns about speeding on the trail and to address the concerns about the e-bikes that have been raised. Again, we want to have that data to guide our responses. The Pinellas Trail has a legal speed limit of 20 miles per hour, so as we go through this presentation, just keep that in mind. The first part of the study was to look at our trail counters, the data that we collected from those. And those measure everybody that passes by them. I've been to, you see a map right there. I have personally been to all of them except for the northernmost one up in Tarpon Springs. And they do differentiate between pedestrians and cyclists, but they do not differentiate between electric and non-electric. So we'll be talking about that a little bit later in the presentation. So we went out and did that. We did field work to, the field work part was to find out, was to investigate more on the electric, the e-bike concerns and see what the speeding conditions are like. Are people on e-bikes using the trail in a dangerous manner, so that we really had those direct observations. And then another just point of context, all bike and scooter sharing, and that's the stuff that you can rent in downtown St. Pete. I don't know if it's available in any other municipality, but the scooter sharing, the bike sharing that's available through the governments here in Pinellas County is allowed on the trail as long as they are under 20 miles per hour. And I have been told that those have a 20 mile per hour limit on them. All right. So the first overarching piece of data, this was average daily use at each of the 7 counters that we were able to collect data from. And as you can see, City of Dunedin is by far the most used area of the trail. And we'll talk a little bit more when I talk about field work. We witnessed that as well. People are just coming and going all the time at Dunedin. The least used is up at Lake Tarpon. And Bay Pines and St. Petersburg also had a lot. You can see the progression there. And then user types. Originally, this trail was built as for the purpose of cyclists. And as you can see, that is what most of the users are. They are on a bicycle of some sort. However, there's still plenty of pedestrians that use it. All right, and this is a graph that talks about overall daily users versus speeders. And so as you can see, the speeding overall on the trail is quite low. The overall percentage for the entire trail for the study period, which was March, April, and May of 2021, and we selected those months because those were the busiest months, so we felt that they would give us the most complete picture. But the overall percentage was 1.05%. So we collected 504,000 measurements through the trail counters, and about 5,000 of those were speeding. We're going over 20 miles per hour. And then daily speeders, again, let me turn around, I can't read that. We're looking probably at an average of between 50 and 60 per day, and this is across the entire trail, which I believe is about 47 miles. So that helps us to provide some context. It also shows that there are some people who indeed are speeding. And it was really important to me as we did this study that this not come off as dismissive of people's concerns or comments. We certainly don't want to say, oh, well, there's only 1% speeding, so, doesn't matter. But we can use this information, like I said, to help guide the conversation. All right, so summary of trail counter data. Again, 543,305 total measurements. 5,729 of those were speeding, which is an overall speeding rate of 1.05% across the trail. When we break that down into each individual counters, as you can see, some of them had higher rates of speeding, some of them had lower rates of speeding. East Lake up in the north was the highest rate at 3.6%. However, it's notable that that is also the area that was the least used. And the analogy that I like to think of is when we're driving on an empty freeway at night and we look down and see we're going 90 miles an hour. It's just a little more difficult to judge your speed when you don't have
Don't admit that.
other traffic. However, it's still speeding, so it's still something that needs to be addressed. Dunedin, that area had a 0.5% speeding rate over the 89 days of the study. Clearwater, 0.5%. Walsingham was 0.25%. Seminole was about 1%. Bay Pines, 2.6%. And St. Petersburg was 1.3%. When we average those out, like we said, it comes out to about 1% of trail users who are speeding. All right, so next we decided we wanted to go out onto the trail and see what was going on for ourselves. The trail counter data is great to have, but nothing can substitute for direct observation and saying, hey, we put our money where our mouth is, and we went to the trail to see with our own eyes what people are talking about. And so on December 13th, we spent an hour at the Dunedin counter and an hour at the Bay Pines counter. And then April 11th, we spent 2 hours at Dunedin, 2 hours at Palm Harbor, and April 12th, 2 hours at Bay Pines, 2 hours at St. Pete. And we chose these areas because they either had the highest rates of speeding or the highest rates of usage. You can see we spent 3 total hours at Dunedin and 3 total hours at Bay Pines, because Bay Pines both had a high rate of use, but also a high rate of speeding. Dunedin was a bit lower rate of speeding, but still a very high rate of use, and we actually get a lot of complaints from Dunedin. So we wanted to go out and see what was going on. Yeah, I know that I've been on your Facebook page, and I know that this is a hot topic there. So anyway, that's how we chose these. We did think about going up to East Lake. However, it was determined that we could sit there for 5 hours and maybe see about 10 people. So we didn't think that that was going to provide us with a very solid source of data. And the other purpose of the field work was to collect data on electronic and non-electronic users, because again, the field counter, or the trail counters did not do that. We really wanted to address this concern of our citizens, and so we needed to do that in person. We used county-issued speed guns from the Department of Public Works. And overall, our trends matched the trail counters as far as rates of speeding, and we'll go into that a little bit more on the next slide. All right, so this is our summary of the fieldwork findings. In the 3 hours we spent at Dunedin, we measured the speed of 235 users, only one of whom was speeding, and that is about 0.4%, which the trail counters showed us about 0.5, so pretty much in line there. We measured 21 electric users, which is a rate of 8.9%, and only one of those electric users was actually speeding. In Bay Pines, over the 3 hours we were there, we measured 110 users. Again, one person was speeding. That gives us a rate of 0.9, which was significantly lower than the trail counters, which the trail counters was 2.6 over the 3-month period. 16 of those were on electric vehicles, which is 14.5% of users at that counter, and we did not measure any of them speeding. So that gave us an electric speeding rate of 0%. Palm Harbor, we measured 86 users in the 2 hours we were there, one of whom was speeding, and it was not electric. We measured 14 electric users at Palm Harbor, which is 16.3% of all users at the Palm Harbor counter. St. Pete, which was a very interesting one, that counter, which is near Trailhead Park, we measured 73 users in 2 hours, 2 of whom were speeding, which is a rate of 2.7%, which is significantly higher than the trail counter data, which was 1.3% in St. Pete. 16 of those 73 users was electric, and which is 21.9%, and 2 of those were speeding, which gave us a rate of 12.5% at that for the electric users.
Are you allowed to give them tickets?
No, and actually we had one gentleman turn around and come back to us and say, "Are you trying to give me a ticket?" And Mike wanted to ask, "Why did you turn around if we didn't come after you? Just move on." And he got very upset with me, and I told him, "No, we're just measuring. Everything's good. Go on." And he was fine. He moved on. But yeah.
Weren't hidden behind bushes.
No, we tried in certain areas. Like at Bay Pines, it's right at the end of a bridge, and so we were able to kind of hide behind the bridge, similar to Dunedin. There's a little bridge there, and so we were kind of able to hide behind the bridge. Trailhead Park, the trail is wide open. If we wanted to get down in the ditch, we maybe could have, but I don't know. It would have made it challenging. So anyway, some overall, the interesting thing about Bay Pines and St. Pete that I do want to bring up is that a lot of those people work clearly commuting. We saw many, many people in uniforms, in business attire, carrying backpacks. And so that's a really important thing to keep in mind, especially when we talk a little bit about e-bikes in the upcoming slides. I got to talk to a lot of people. They would see our signs or see us with speed guns and come talk to us and, what are you guys doing, you know? And they were more than eager to share their thoughts on many things. Commissioner Albritton.
You're counting electric bikes, but what about micro-mobility, like scooters, all the rest?
That was everything electronic. We saw that, so that includes scooters, that includes bikes, and we even had a few electric longboards. So that's everything electronic. Yep. So if we look at our totals, we measured a total of 504 users when we were on the trail during our field work. Only 5 of them were speeding, which is in line with our trail counter data. That gives out to about 1%, and which, as you remember, our overall trail counter data was about 1.05%. 67 of those 504 users were on some sort of electric micromobility vehicle, which is 13.3% of what we measured, and only 3 of those people were speeding. So, which gives the electric speeding rate of 4.5%. And I know that looks a little bit higher, but one thing that we really need to consider is just look at the absolute number here. We have 3 people out of 67. This shows us that the vast, vast majority of people on the trail who are using electronic modes of transport are using it respectfully and responsibly. And I also want to really add that of those 3, only 1 was truly being dangerous. It was at the Dunedin counter, and it was an electric scooter going 28 miles an hour, and he was weaving in and out of traffic. Yeah, but the other 2 we saw at St. Pete, they were in business attire, they were commuting home from work, and they were on an empty stretch of trail. So they really were not endangering anybody. They were not in a busy area. Yeah, we'll continue. So some key takeaways: low rates of speeding across the trail, verified by the trail counter data and by the field work, the in-person observation, low rates of daily speeding. And what we really talked about in-house was that there is really a possible perception issue here. The highest speed bands that we measured were the 0 to 5 speed band and the 11 to 15, which shows we have a lot of walkers and a lot of cyclists. And it is very easy, and I did some walking on the trail just to kind of test it, and it's very easy to see somebody go by you when you're walking 2 or 3 miles an hour, and they might be going 14 or 15 miles an hour and say, oh my gosh, they're going so fast. And indeed, there were 62,000 people measured over the 89 days that were going the 16 to 20. And so that's technically not speeding, but it could very easily be seen that or it could be complained or reported that that person is speeding. So that's a big thing to keep into consideration. The electric average was about 13.3% across the trail, and the percent of speeders who were electric were 6% of all those speeding, 0.6% of all those speeding. So recommendations, continue monitoring this. It's important, I think, that we have continued data to be able to respond to citizens. Work with law enforcement and Parks and Conservation and Public Works. They all have a part in this. Parks and Conservation and Public Works are involved in signage and trail markings, and I know that that's something that they are working on their end. And then there were some recommendations in some of the committees about evaluating speed limits on some areas of the trail. Notice I did not put reduce. The sheriff's office has communicated to Chelsea Favero that they think that that might cause more problems than it solves. But in some use areas, like downtown Dunedin or other high-use areas, near schools was a concern reported by some committee members, and then near busy intersections. We may just look at what the impact would be if we made alterations to the speed limit. And then finally, continue educational and safe trail messaging through signage, public outreach. I know our communications person at Ford Pinellas does a lot of work to put out information on social media about using the trail safely. And that is all I have. So thank you all very much. If you have any questions. Mayor. Yes?
That's okay.
Go.
Whit and I have talked about it a lot, and I know he's an avid bike rider, so he's very protective over all of that, and I do appreciate that. I think what the real problem is in the busy areas. And we all know Dunedin's one that is the busiest, but I'm sure there are others. I really do think we have to somehow separate the walkers and the bikers. I think if you can do that, you solve all of this. And I'm not saying the whole trail. I'm saying sections. Yes, I understand it gets money, but I don't care how many Facebook posts you put out there, the message is not going to change.
Right.
Not in those busy areas. It just isn't. It's a very popular thing. And I just think you have to separate them, whether it's making the trail wider where you can in certain areas, or, I don't know, putting something down the middle, or two separate trail, there is some places where there's enough right of way. But, and I'm not saying that should be everywhere. The biggest thing I hear, and I know that we're looking at changing that, Whit, you told me, I hear every day, when are you guys gonna remark the trail? The walkers are supposed to be over here and the bikes are supposed to be over there, and now I hear it's this pass to the left or pass to the, whatever it is. People are looking for that marking. Because the reason they're looking for it is because they wanna feel safe. If they're a walker, they know that if they're wherever the marking is, they're safe. That's that feeling of even if a fast bike goes. I think there are certain areas where we have to separate these things, especially now that we have the pedal assist and the electric bikes. Because, I had a whole debate with Whit about why in the hell are we allowing these things on Pinellas Trail? Really smartly, he brought to my attention that there are a lot of older folks or people with disabilities or whatever that need that help, but still want to be on a bike, right? So I hadn't thought about it that way. So I do get that. But again, with now a much faster bike than most, I'm not talking about the racer guys, because I see them all over the place. They'll go anywhere. They don't even have to be on the trail. I just think we have to separate them somehow, whether it's a physical separation or a yellow line. I think people will feel safer and will complain less, and then continue the whole safe trail messaging. But when you've got walkers, bicyclists, recreational bicyclists, then you got the long haul bicyclists, and then you got the electric bikes, all doing this, which is exactly what they're doing in my city, it doesn't feel safe. And I'm sure there are other areas that are like that. So I just say, I think we have to invest in that.
Anyone else? Anyone else? Okay. Thank you,
Thank you.
Alex, and thank you for being with us, and I wish you all the success in your future endeavors.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. So we have a regular interaction through not only our committees, but with Pinellas County staff who maintains the trail, manages the trail. In fact, we are just wrapping up an e-bike survey, Joan, that's finishing now. So that is part of the consideration, and we will continue to look at ways to add that clarity and information and look at opportunities for separation. I think the philosophy, though, is slower users stay to the right and then pass on the left, which is intuitively what people are trained to do.
And I don't think that's wrong either. I'm just saying, I think in the busier areas, especially where there's a lot of walkers, again, it's a perception. It's that feeling that you're going like this and they're flying by. And I think it's unsafe.
Yeah.
I really do.
There's some things we can work on, and we will continue to have
A lot of
dialogue.
people walking dogs.
Now we have data, and now we have some good basis of information that we can continue to evaluate.
Just a quick question. It seems like, I know downtown Dunedin has made all of their main streets 15 miles an hour. So it's faster on the trail than it is on the streets, which is kind of interesting. Is there a potential then that little downtown area from, say, Scotland to the south to, I don't know, even I was thinking just in that really, where you just put like just a 15 miles an hour, just, it shows.
Yeah.
This area is just slow it down a little bit because it's so congested.
I think so,
I mean,
yeah.
it just sends a signal,
I think
all.
that's something that can be discussed. That'll be probably brought to the board at the Board of County Commissioners at a work session. It may be this fall. I'm not sure when we're planning to do that now. But there'll probably be some opportunity for some policy direction in that regard. Whether you have enforcement or it's just the message that you want to convey. The other thing that we found that's really successful on our roads are the speed feedback message signs that let you know, hey, you're going 45, it's 35 through here. That may be something that we could do in certain areas of the trail to let people
But certainly
know.
that Scotland to Monroe is just absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, and it just sends a signal. I don't know.
I think you're
in
right.
favor of enforcement, but certainly telling people.
So you
to
know
slow
what my
down.
strategy is? My strategy is to make a lot more roads safer for bicyclists to be on, so they don't feel like they all have to be on the trail. And that's an expensive endeavor, and you see the pushback we get on Drew Street and some other roads where you're trying to create space for that. But that's really ultimately where we need to be, is looking at safer roadways. And the department has revised their standards for bike lanes on busy roads, fast roads. It just takes time to get those things implemented.
Okay, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just
Dave?
want to make a comment. When we use the trail a lot, and we have electric bikes, and I find that when I come into Dunedin, I get off my bike and I walk it because
You're a good
there's
citizen.
so many people there. I mean, how do you ride through? How do you even go 5 miles an hour? It's better just to walk it. I don't know what kind of messaging you can put for that, but anyway, just wanted to make that comment.
Yep.
That's great that it's so successful. We're going to go to 7, 8, 9, the director's report, and we're going to wrap this up. I apologize that it's been such a long meeting today. There was a lot of information and a lot of ideas, thoughtful conversation and discussion. I appreciate that with all of you. And with that, Whit, want to?
Yeah, the last 3 meetings were 2.5 or 2 hours, or
No,
even
we were
1.5.
awesome.
So.
Yes. John Maroney would have been not too happy with me. Wouldn't have been happy with me.
That's okay.
But he was real happy with me before today.
We had a good discussion. I'll keep it really brief here. I just wanted to let you know that we did, I wrote a letter for to the Division of State Parks for the Honeymoon Island roundabout, requesting state funding, not FDOT funding, because that's mostly within park property, and we've heard from the state, I can't use federal funds, we can't use state funds, it's off system. The county's not interested in funding that roundabout, from what we've heard from staff, and Dunedin doesn't appear to be interested in it, and it's really wholly within the park's footprint. So I wrote that letter, it's in your agenda packet. The only other thing I wanted to mention about our Gateway Area Master Plan, we're not forgetting about it. We have a partners meeting on June 3rd to talk about further implementation steps. And there is some money from FDOT for commute options programs that we are looking to develop a scope for what kind of a project we might want to do under that funding program. If you can, I'll just transition into a couple of other items that I want to mention under mine is we had our Metropolitan Planning Organization Advisory Committee meetings back on April 27th and 28th. Commissioner Eggers attended the governing board meeting. Thank you for doing that. The MPOAC voted to approve a list of freight projects that they recommend to the state. So I think that's a really useful activity. Our next meeting is coming up on July 6th, where we have a policy and technical committee where we will start developing our legislative platform for MPOs going forward. And then just real quickly, the bipartisan infrastructure law, there is a notice of funding opportunity soon to be advertised this month, we expect. That was the webinar that Rodney mentioned. There is a 20% match for these funds. The state is not eligible for the funds directly. The money will go to MPOs and local governments. For safety projects, they can include planning, construction, design, and they can also be used to close a gap of projects that are already partially funded. And then there's also a webinar for another competitive grant program called Reconnecting Communities, which deals with sort of the highway impacts on established neighborhoods or underserved neighborhoods. And we're interested in possibly pursuing a planning grant under that program for the I-175 corridor. The Department of Transportation has initiated work on an engineering feasibility study looking at 3 different alternatives for I-175, including leave it as is, a viaduct or an elevated partial interstate, and then a more extensive removal. And we'll be going out to the public after that first phase is finished. And we think this Reconnecting Communities grant could be a good way to have the community help figure out what to do with whatever additional area might be created out there. So I'll give you updates as this happens, but we are in close communication with your local government staff on these potential grant applications. And there are competitive programs, but we think we have the potential to be pretty successful. And that's all I have.
Include the bridges, trail, would that fall into that, or?
It could be, it could be. I mean, I think if we can demonstrate that we've got a known safety problem, and we do in the county, we'll look at the eligibility of something like that.
Thanks.
Anything else from anyone? Just, I was looking at the Safe Streets Pinellas resolution, and I noticed that Councilmember Noble, you guys have not done a resolution, so I don't even know if you did do it? Okay.
All right, good, thank you.
Yay. Is there anyone else who needs the resolution?
City Clearwater.
Well, I already texted her, so there you go. I text one of them.
I
And-
heard it was stuck in engineering.
Yes. So, yes, can we come to your meeting or something to get you guys? Yeah, absolutely. That's what I want you to do, is bring it up. Yeah, okay. Next meeting. Okay, good, very good. All right, with that, motion to adjourn? Thank you, and a second, good. All, have a nice weekend. All in favor? Aye.